Chapter 1045. Dean waved goodbye to Lewin and followed Gully to the largest tent. He saw a slender youth sitting behind a desk in the tent. He was flipping through a book. He looked up when he heard Gully's voice. His eyes fell on Dean, who was next to Gully. "Boss, this is the newcomer. His name is Ryan," Gully said in a loud voice. "Hello, platoon leader," Dean called out. At the same time, he looked at the platoon leader. The latter was younger than he had imagined. Unlike the people outside, he had a scholarly aura but didn't appear weak. At first glance, he could tell that he was a person who had restrained his murderous aura. Fett smiled. "You are one of us. You don't have to be polite." "Yes, boss is very easy to talk to." Gully laughed. Fett glanced at him. "You lost in arm wrestling, but you still want to take back the money. Your face is getting thicker and thicker recently." Gully was startled. "Boss, you can't blame me. Brother Dean has an agility-type magic mark. I didn't have time to react before I lost." Fett snorted. "A loss is a loss. Don't find excuses. Take him to change into our uniform. Also, tell him about our rules. Don't bother me if there is nothing else." Gully smiled apologetically and retreated with Dean. "Don't look at boss. He is actually very easy to talk to," Gully explained to Fett as they left the tent. Dean smiled. "I know. I can see that he is a good person." Gully laughed. "That's right. Boss Feet is much better than the platoon leaders of the other regiments. You'll know in the future. Let's go. I'll take you to change your clothes first. Then, I'll take you to have a feast." There was a trace of excitement in his eyes when he said, "Eat meat." Dean frowned. He vaguely smelled the meaning of eat meat. It seemed that there should be a profession like military prostitutes. The life of such people was obviously miserable. It was likely that they were refugees from the weak giant wall or the slums of the Empire. "It's not good to eat meat. Let's go next time. I will treat you." Dean smiled. "I'm new here, so I'm not familiar with this place. Can you tell me about this place? I've heard that the trolls outside the War God's Wall are very ferocious and look very strange. Do you know where I can find them? Their corpses are also good." "You haven't seen trolls?" Gully was a bit surprised, but he didn't ask any questions. Although he looked rough, he wasn't stupid. He wouldn't recklessly invade someone else's privacy. He smiled and said, "This giant demon is indeed strange. Its entire body is covered in metal armor, and its eyes can shoot out a red light. If you are hit, a hole will appear. Moreover, its perception is terrifying. No matter where you hide, it can find you. So powerful." A general image emerged in Dean's mind. He was slightly startled. "Are all trolls like this?" Gully grunted. "Their abilities are similar, but there are also some differences. For example, some trolls can raise a huge light shield to block attacks, whether it's physical or energy attacks, including fire and ice attacks. Oh, right, these trolls also have a very scary thing. They're immune to poison. Yes, there's one more thing about them. They're immune to it. No venom can cause harm to them. Even the undead virus can't." Dean was startled. His heartbeat accelerated. Undead virus couldn't infect them? Did the genes of the trolls have antibodies against undead virus? He was so excited that he couldn't wait to turn around and rush out of the giant wall to find a troll to dissect and experiment on. But his reason made him restrain his excitement. "What's wrong with you?" Gully looked at him strangely. He found that Dean's shoulders were slightly trembling. Dean came back to his senses, shook his head, and smiled. "Nothing. I just think that the troll is really terrifying. It can be immune to all venom. In this case, we can only rely on real swords and spears to fight the troll." "Well, we can only fight with them." Gully nodded and grinned. "But it's not our turn to fight with trolls. We can only commit suicide if we encounter a troll. Even if it stands there and lets us kill it, we can't hurt it. The metal armor of the troll is too hard to communicate with. We can't hurt it all. We can only rely on the Abyss Walkers." Dean was curious. "You haven't fought with trolls? Then how do you know this?" "I haven't shot a bird, but I haven't seen a bird fly." Gully shrugged. "You will understand after staying here for a long time and participating in several battles. But I think it's best if you don't understand. Generally, when we have the opportunity to see the battle between the Abyss Walkers and the trolls, it means that the situation in the front line is very critical. At this time, even our gunner group will be affected. Gunner group? Dean was stunned. Didn't Lund tell you? Gully saw Dean's reaction and felt strange. Our platoon belongs to the 9th Platoon of the 3rd Company of the Gunner Group. We mainly operate the artillery to attack from the rear. In most cases, we fight on the God of War's wall. Occasionally, we will be sent to the outside of the wall. Gully suddenly thought of something and looked at Dean. Do you play with artillery? I haven't played with it. Dean shook his head. He understood that the reason why Paulina assigned him to this platoon was because she was worried that he would rush to the front line. The last time he was used as cannon fodder on the God of War's wall. This time, he was the gunner from the rear. It seems that I have to take you to familiarize yourself with it. Don't worry, this thing isn't difficult. It's just that it consumes strength. Gully laughed. For the first time, Dean knew that being a gunner required strength. He thought of Gully and the other soldiers he had seen before. All of them had rough and strong bodies. It seemed that the artillery here was quite different from what he had imagined. Soon, Gully took Dean to the uniform camp. He helped Dean pick 2 sets of uniforms and familiarize him with the surrounding environment. Finally, he took Dean to the front of the artillery. Dean finally knew why it was a work of strength. The shape of the artillery was similar to that of the old era, but the volume was completely different. The base was 5 or 6 meters high. The caliber of the artillery on the base was about 50 centimeters. The barrel was 7 or 8 meters long. There was a scope behind the barrel and a handle to control the angle of the barrel. The overall look was rough. Generally, firing the cannon is relatively simple. You just need to hold it. But you need to control the angle if you want to hit the monster in a specific location. Once the cannon is started, it can continue to fire for about 10 minutes. The base is filled with shells, and it will automatically refill. But we need to control the angle. After the cannon is started, we need to twist the angle to withstand a large recoil. Look at my hands. They're all made by this thing. Gully explained to Dudian as he stretched out his hands to show them. Dean noticed that his hands were full of calluses and burns. He glanced at the place where the barrel was connected to the base and found that it was active so that the recoil of the barrel would have less pressure on the base. The base is filled with ammunition and the barrel is mobile. It relies on manpower to offset the recoil. Dean found that the designer of the artillery was quite clever. He had improved the artillery of the old era to perfectly adapt to this era. Relying on a gunner to act as the base could increase the power of the primitive artillery by dozens of times. However, it was quite mysterious that the barrel could withstand the continuous firing of shells. Chapter 1046. In the evening, Gully was going to take Dean out to eat and drink, but Fitter called him and said that he wanted to introduce Dean to everyone. Dean also got to know the rest of the platoon. There were a total of 48 people in the platoon, including the deputy platoon leader and the platoon leader. There was no division in the platoon. Unlike the recruit camp, there was no squad leader. Usually the deputy platoon leader hunter was the main person in charge of the platoon. Only Fitter would be the one to make decisions. The queue was full of males. After dinner, Dean integrated into the small group. Gully was drunk, so he talked about the embarrassing incident of arm wrestling. He patted Dean's shoulder and vaguely said that he admired him. Dean knew that this rough-looking man actually knew that he lost to Dean not because his hand speed was faster, but because his strength was not as good as Dean's. But because of his face, he was embarrassed to admit it. Gully's words told the others that Dean, who didn't look like a power-type warrior, had won against Gully in arm wrestling. Gully was ranked in the top 10 in the queue. In terms of pure strength, there were less than 5 people who could win against him. Dean had become a little famous person in the queue. Strength was respected everywhere, especially in the army. Many people had withdrawn from the banquet by the time the dinner was over. Some people drank too much and directly passed out in the tent. Dean supported the drunk Gully and sent him back to his tent. Then he went outside and found a secluded place. The surrounding lights were dim. The easygoing smile on Dean's face gradually disappeared. He looked up at the night scene. The clouds in the distance and the moon was gradually emerging. He also looked at the vast land and the rivers that divided the land. "Where are you?" Dean murmured. After a long time, the absent-mindedness in Dean's eyes suddenly converged, and his eyes flashed. At this time, a voice came from behind him. It's so late. Why don't you go to sleep? The voice was familiar. It was Fitter. Dean turned around and saw Fitter carrying a bottle of wine. Platoon leader, you haven't slept yet? I can't sleep. Fitter smiled and looked at the direction Dean was heading in. He sighed. Are you homesick? Dean shook his head. My home is gone. Fett was startled, but didn't say anything. He was silent for a moment. Then he patted Dudian's shoulder and handed him the wine. Come, drink with me. You won't have any worries if you get drunk. That's right. Dean smiled and took 2 sips. We'll only be able to drink for the next 2 days. We won't be able to drink again the day after tomorrow. We've just repelled the trolls, so they won't attack again in the next few days. That's why we can take a breather, Fett said with a smile. Dean took a sip and curiously asked, why won't they attack again? Every time the trolls invade, there will be at least a 7-day interval. This pattern has been going on for decades, Fett said with a smile. Dean frowned and said, but isn't there a risk? If they continue to attack, and we are careless, won't we be caught off guard and be defeated? You think too much. Fett took the wine from Dean's hand and drank 2 mouthfuls. He wiped his mouth and said, the Storm Battalion will investigate the movements in front of us. We will know one day in advance if the trolls attack us. So there's almost no possibility of a troll raid. Even if the trolls avoid the Storm Battalion's raid and go outside the God's Wall, we will be able to react in time. We won't be afraid, even if we get drunk. The medical camp has distributed a lot of sobering pills to us. Once the battle starts, we will be able to sober up and refresh ourselves. Dean suddenly understood. It seemed that he had worried too much. The War God's Wall had stood for less than a few hundred years. The defense here had long been like an iron wall, and many accidents have been eliminated. Tomorrow I'll ask someone to take you to familiarize yourself with the artillery. Try to master it before the next battle. Fett patted Dean's shoulder. Dean nodded. Thank you, platoon leader. If there is anything you don't understand, then you can look for Hunter or me. Fett smiled and handed the wine to Dean. He turned and left. Dean took the bottle in his hand and looked at it. He felt his throat was slightly hot, but he wasn't drunk. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. It was very difficult for him to get drunk with his current physique. His body could detoxify the alcohol too quickly and uncontrollably. Maybe I'm drunk. Maybe they are drunk, Dean whispered as he looked into the distance. Suddenly, he threw the bottle. It seemed that he wanted to throw away all the depression in his heart. However, it was just a bottle. There was no wine in it. The next day, Dean learned the operation of the artillery from the veterans called by Fett. In the evening, Gully found an opportunity to take Dean to dinner and compensate him. The two strolled to the largest and only food street of the artillery regiment. Dean found that the food street was similar to the food street in the city. There were stalls selling food and drinks, as well as taverns. There was a common flag on the signs of the shops. He asked Gully and learned that the flag represented the Count of the Empire. The Count in the Empire and the Count in the Giant Wall were not on the same level. It could be said that the nobles in the Empire were the real nobles. Most of the nobles in the Giant Wall were the descendants of the ancestors of the Giant Wall. There was no difference between them and the commoners in the Empire. They had no rights. The business of the aristocracy has reached the Wall of War. Dean saw the food street. He felt that the Empire had been corrupted by the mucus and was scattered all over the place. After dinner, Gully took Dean to the tavern to relieve his boredom. But Dean refused. Dean didn't have much demand for women. Moreover, he had a person who was worthy of his life. Gully seemed to be hungry and thirsty. He could only tell Dean the route back to the tavern when he saw that Dean didn't want to go. Dudian took the opportunity to leave the food street. He used his X-ray vision to look around. He looked at the artillery regiment and its various places. Through his X-ray vision, he found that the strength of the artillery regiment was beyond his imagination. Just in the barracks near the Delicacy Street, he could see the vigorous heat reaction. There were 7 abysses, and this was not the full strength of the artillery battalion. It seems that all the strong ones have been sent to the frontier. Aristotle has been in the Empire for 10 years. Is he here to serve in the frontier? Dean thought. He was more careful to hide his aura. He didn't dare to get close to the abysses. In case the other side had X-ray vision, they would be able to see the situation inside his body. Obviously, in this huge border battlefield, there was bound to be a perceptor with the ability to see through things. However, whether or not the other party would use it to observe him was another matter. He could only pray that he wouldn't be so unlucky and try to keep a low profile. Chapter 10:47. In the blink of an eye, Dean had been on the God of War's wall for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Fitter suddenly gathered everyone and told them that there was a mission from the front line. Dean and the others had only 1 hour to prepare. They had to arrive at the front line by noon. "Little Dean, how's your artillery practice?" Deputy Platoon Leader Hunter found Dudian. Dudian was bearded and looked to be in his 40s. There were 2 cross scars on his thick and hairy arms. "I've completely mastered it," Dean replied. Hunter shook his head and smiled. "I wanted to find an excuse for you to rest. But since you have mastered it, go and prepare. This is your first battle, and you will be on the front line. Follow the others and retreat. Be smart. Also, don't worry about the artillery. Your life is the most important." Dean nodded. "Thank you, Deputy Platoon Leader." He found that the people he met this time were pretty good. Less than half an hour later, everyone gathered at the small area in the tents. Fit and Hunter took the lead and left the tents, heading in the direction of the outside of the Battle God wall. They walked along the wide path in the center of the tents, and when they reached the end, the scenery outside the Battle God wall appeared before their eyes. However, it wasn't the mountains and rivers they had imagined. Instead, it was a land filled with holes. Dean looked into the distance, but didn't see the fortress wall on the east side of the God of War's wall. It seemed that the enemies on each side of the God of War's wall were different. That was probably the reason why there weren't so many high-end technologies and spaceships on the east side of the God of War's wall. "Artillery Regiment, 3rd Company, 9th Platoon reporting for duty," Fitter shouted. A young man in military uniform with a gold star on his shoulder looked at them and ordered the short-haired female assistant, "Register them on the airship." "Yes." The short-haired woman nodded and came to Fitter for registration. Under the leadership of Fitter, everyone boarded the airship next to them. Each airship carried 5 people. There were 6 people, including the pilots. While Dean and others were still queuing up to register, Fit and the other 4 had already boarded the airship and left. Soon the second airship followed. In the blink of an eye, it was Dean's turn. He stood together with Gully and boarded the same airship. The airships formed a line and flew out of the Battle God wall. Clouds and mist lingered in the air. When one's vision passed through the devastated land, they could faintly see a stretch of darkness at the end of the horizon. This touch of darkness made everyone feel depressed. No one spoke on the airship. Even Gully, who was a bit talkative, was silent. He only said a few words to Dean and then remained silent. Half an hour later, the airship slowly landed. Dean silently estimated the distance and the speed of the airship. He found that the battlefield was at least 200 miles away from the God of War's wall. Although this distance was nothing to him, but it wasn't close on land. It could be seen that the war in the south wasn't limited to the God of War's wall, but outside the wall. It showed that the Empire's defense in the south was in a state of suppression. Gully sighed as the airship slowly landed. "I hope everyone can survive this time." They were thinking about whether they would die or not. "We will see the trolls soon." Dean was looking forward to it. The airship landed in a trench. The ground was full of trenches, and there were anti-aircraft turrets. There was a 50 meters high stone wall in front of them. There were many monsters flashing outside the stone wall, but it was difficult to get close to them due to the heavy firepower bombardment. They got off the airship. Fett was already waiting in front of trench. The people who got off the airship were lined up. Dean, Gully, and others quickly rushed over and stood at the back of the line. Fett waited for a moment as the last group of people arrived from the airship. He said in a loud voice, "I got the news that the trolls will attack in an hour. They are just the vanguard sent by the trolls. They are pretending to attack to test our defenses. In the next hour, everyone must adjust their state and stick to their posts. No one is allowed to leave without the order to retreat. Otherwise, you will be punished according to the military rules." "Yes." Everyone roared in unison. Fett nodded and let Hunter lead the people to their respective posts. Cannons had already been set up next to the trench. There were huge steel wheels under the bases of these cannons that could be pushed, but at this moment, the wheels had already been erected, and there was a support below, firmly fixed to the ground. Two people took turns to control a cannon. Dean and a familiar person were assigned to a cannon. The person seemed to know that Dean didn't know him. He stood on the base of the cannon and smiled. "Hello, Lionel. My name is Delia." "Hello." Dean nodded. "Please take care of me." "Don't say that. I'm also a rookie." Delia smiled and looked at the stone wall in front of him. There was a worried look on his face. These monsters were able to break through the frontline defense and attack our artillery battalion. It seems that the trolls' invasion isn't small. Dean was surprised. "Isn't this the frontline position?" "Of course not. Our artillery battalion is in the middle and back of the battlefield. There is the army fortress in front of us. These monsters must have bypassed the army fortress and sneaked over here. Otherwise, the army fortress is in a dangerous situation." Delia frowned. Dean was puzzled as he couldn't figure out how the battlefield was divided. But he had a faint guess. Perhaps the army had a special retreat route. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to be so far away from the artillery battalion. Otherwise, the artillery battalion could only watch helplessly as the army and the monsters fought against each other. They wouldn't be able to attack. Trolls. Dean looked in front of him. In addition to the occasional monster that was jumping high, he couldn't see anything. The line of sight on the ground slowly became blurred. An hour passed quickly. Suddenly, an angry roar came from the front of the stone wall, like a sudden clap of thunder. Everyone was startled, and all the pores on their bodies shrank, instantly entering a tense battle state. Looking through the observation mirror on the cannon, they saw a few exuberant red dots appear behind the stone wall. As these red dots slowly approached, more and more red dots appeared, densely packed, and in just a few breaths, they occupied the entire observation mirror. Chapter 1048. Woo! The melodious sound of the horn came from the turrets behind the stone wall. The horn was made of the horn of the monster. The sound was simple and vigorous. It could stimulate people's fighting spirit. The stone wall stretched across the front of the battlefield. There was a turret every 10 meters. At the moment, all the horns on the turrets sounded in unison. It was like the howl of a sleeping giant beast. The sound was huge and resounded throughout the battlefield. The sound waves of the horn stimulated the scalp of many soldiers. Their blood was boiling and their fighting spirit was surging. Dean felt that there was only the sound of the horn in the world. He couldn't hear anything else. The killing intent in his body was gradually awakened. In the battlefield environment, it was easy to be emotional. He took a deep breath and calmed down. But he heard a roar coming from the side. He turned around and saw Delia clenching his fists. His face was nervous and excited. His eyes were terrifying and full of killing intent. He clenched his teeth and looked forward. It seemed that he had forgotten everything at this moment. Hundreds of years of frontier warfare had long since refined the war. Just the beginning had inspired the morale of the soldiers. The horn gradually stopped. The drums sounded. It was the drumbeat of the attack. "It's starting." Delia didn't forget to say to Dean. He grabbed the cannon, rotated the wheel, and aimed at the angle. He said to Dean, "I'll go first. I'll replace you when my hands are tired." "Okay." Dean nodded and stepped back to give up his position. He stood behind and looked into the distance. Dong! Dong! Along with the drumbeat, there was a burst of roar. It seemed that the whole world was shocked. Hundreds of cannons were fired at the same time. The cannons were fired outside the stone wall. After adjusting the angle, the cannons would accurately hit the targeted location. In an instant, the earth-shattering explosion sounded outside the stone wall. Even though Dean was thousands of meters away, he felt the base of the turret under his feet tremble slightly. There was such a strong aftershock from the fluctuations of the earth. It showed how terrible the power of the cannons was. But at this moment, Dean wasn't thinking about the damage caused by the cannons to the monsters. Instead, his mind was suddenly overlooking the earth from the sky. It was full of devastation. No matter what kind of battle it was always this planet that suffered the most damage. After a few years, even if humans restore the dominance of the Earth, will the Earth be able to return to the past? Such thoughts flashed in Dean's mind. A touch of sadness rose in his heart. But soon, a harsh sound of artillery pulled his thoughts back to reality. The previous feelings were immediately thrown to the back of his mind. The reality always made people forget about fantasies. These monsters are pioneer level and dominator level. Dudian's eyes flashed. His vision penetrated the stone wall and saw the scene outside. Countless monsters were rushing over, but were killed by the dense firepower of the artillery. Under the absolute suppression of the firepower, these monsters couldn't get close to the stone wall. The power of the artillery was much greater than he had imagined. Moreover, it seemed to be highly toxic and had a wide range of destruction. He saw that when some artillery shells exploded, countless shrapnel would shoot out in all directions, causing secondary damage. In addition, the dust from the explosion was thick and did not disperse. Many monsters rushed into the thick fog, and their bodies were obviously slowed down. Moreover, the wounds on their bodies were rapidly rotting. Wherever the blood touched the dust, it would soon fester and ooze. At this moment, the role of chemistry was far more terrible than that of the strong of the abyss. There were many kinds of monsters, and they seemed to be unafraid of death. However, there were also some monsters who were scared out of their wits by the bombardment of the artillery shells and were hesitant to charge forward. However, the monsters behind them pushed forward like bulldozers. Some of the slower ones were knocked over and trampled by the monsters behind them, while others were hit by the continuous bombardment and died on the spot. Dean looked for a while, but he didn't see the troll they described. He couldn't help but frown slightly. "Oh, my hands are so sore." At this time, Delia gritted his teeth and shouted. His previous boiling fighting spirit was now drowned by exhaustion. He turned to Dean and said, "Come and pick me up." Dean nodded and stepped forward to replace Delia. He rotated the wheel and aimed at the place with the most number of monsters. As the shell was ejected, the strong recoil pushed the barrel towards Dean. Dean held it with both of his hands. He used his arms to push and retract the recoil to remove the impact. At this time, a group of dense red dots were flying in the sky outside the stone wall. The drum beat on the turret quickly changed. Dean remembered the instructions that the drum beat represented. The change of the drum beat was directed to the elite of the artillery regiment. They were told to adjust the barrel and attack the sky. A group of black clouds swept over the sky. If one looked carefully, they would see that all of them were skeleton-shaped monsters. Their beaks were extremely large and sharp. Their bodies had a rotten smell. The row of cannons at the very front of the stone wall quickly rose up and turned towards the sky. With a sudden roar, the cannons fired in unison. The cannons drew a red arc as they shot towards the black cloud, instantly scattering the black cloud. Countless skeleton birds let out sharp screeches as they scattered and flew towards this direction. He felt that the cannons alone may not be able to resist the monsters. He began to think of a way out, but his hands didn't stop. He continued to fire. Woo! At this time, a horn sound came from the top of the head. He saw a medium-sized spaceship rise into the sky in the blink of an eye. The spaceship wasn't equipped with too many weapons, and there were not many crew members. However, there was a huge loudspeaker installed on the spaceship. The spaceship slowly stopped when it reached the top of the stone wall. The next moment, Dean and everyone on the battlefield heard a deep and quaint buzzing sound coming from above the spaceship. The sound waves spread towards the sky outside the stone wall. The scattered skeleton birds were like frightened birds. They turned around and fled in panic. Some of them escaped far away while others fell down. Dean was slightly startled. He didn't expect that these skeleton birds would be afraid of this kind of sound wave attack. He suddenly realized that the Empire had been fighting with the trolls for so many years. Most of them were familiar with the monsters outside the border. If they caught a few prisoners of war and brought back to study, they would definitely be able to find their weaknesses. He thought of the trolls. Perhaps the Empire had already grasped the weaknesses of the trolls. Even the situation of the trolls was beyond his imagination. At this moment, there was a sudden change. A beam of light suddenly appeared and penetrated the spaceship above the stone wall. This beam of light had a diameter of more than 10 meters. It was shot from a very far distance. It was so far that Dean couldn't see the end of it even with his X-ray vision. At this moment, the beam of light flashed and the spaceship was pierced through. The sound of the horn abruptly disappeared. The spaceship issued an explosion sound and swayed down from midair. The elite artillery regiment under the spaceship hastily retreated, but the artillery that was left in place was hit by the spaceship. Boom! It exploded on the spot. Dean stared blankly. He felt that his whole body was trembling. His heart was pounding wildly. He was too familiar with that beam of light. It was a laser. These giant demons could actually use lasers. If the laser was aimed at him, perhaps he wouldn't even have the time to react. He would be directly obliterated. With a diameter of more than 10 meters, his whole body would turn into ashes and disappear. This sudden sense of danger made him want to immediately leave the battlefield. If the troll race could release such a large laser beam, then it should be quite common to see such a small laser cannon. Dean turned his head and was ready to say that his hands were sore. He asked Delia to replace him, but he saw Delia staring at the explosion of the spaceship. It seemed that he didn't expect this sudden situation. He lightly coughed and interrupted him. "My hands are tired." Delia was stunned for a moment. He reacted and quickly came forward to replace him. His forehead was full of cold sweat. Dean saw that Delia was also scared. He asked, "Haven't you seen this situation before?" Chapter 1049. Dean felt that his words were a bit strange. What did he mean by really plan to attack? Was the previous invasion of trolls just an act? In any case, this defensive battle seemed to be unusual. He extended his perception to the surroundings and was ready to evacuate at any time. At this time, a burst of drums sounded. At the same time, the horn howled. It was the signal for the whole army to retreat. Dean quickly pulled Delia. "Run." D-Ray felt his body was suddenly out of control. By the time he reacted, he had been dragged onto the cannon by Dean. He didn't have time to think about it. He looked up in a hurry and saw that the people on the other cannons were also quickly retreating. He was relieved and turned to follow Dean's figure. Boom! Both of them didn't run for a few steps when a violent explosion sounded behind them. The strong impact shook the ground. Both of them turned around and saw that the stone wall was broken. There was a huge hole in it. The edge of the hole was scorched black. It seemed that something had burned through it. Roar! Ferocious monsters poured out of the hole. There were centipedes that were 10 feet long, monsters that were half snake and half dog, monsters with bodies that looked like mud and mucus. Countless strange monsters made the hole bigger and bigger. Without the suppression of the cannons, the monsters outside the wall quickly approached. Soon, monsters climbed in from the top of the wall, opened their bloody mouths, and let out ear-piercing roars. Dean's face slightly changed as he looked at the back. There was no sign of reinforcement coming from the direction of War God's wall. His heart sank as he frowned. He felt that things were a bit strange, but he couldn't tell what was strange. "Run!" Gully, Fitch, and others ran over and quickly caught up with Dean and D-Ray. They waved and shouted at the two of them. Delia's head was full of sweat as he ran, but his speed was only a little bit slower than Gully, Fitch, and others. He was soon left behind. Dean didn't accompany him as he accelerated to catch up with Fitch. In the blink of an eye, they came to the airship that was parked at the back of the battlefield. Dudian and Fitch grabbed the same airship and quickly drilled in. Fitch shouted at the frightened pilot, "Take off." The pilot was startled. "It's not full yet, bastard. Hurry up and activate it. They will be here soon." Fett punched the back of the chair and roared. Dean suddenly found that he couldn't recognize the platoon leader. It was far from the previous gentle image. His heart sank and he asked, "Platoon leader, has this happened before? Isn't our artillery regiment at the back of the battlefield? Are the trolls attacking?" Fitch glanced at him, and his anger subsided a little. He gritted his teeth and said, "I don't know. Something must have gone wrong. Those bastards from the intelligence department, I don't believe that they didn't know what was going on in front of us. How could they only let us retreat now? Damn it! Roar! At this moment, a roar came from afar. Dean quickly looked over, and his pupils shrank. He saw a row of black behemoths more than 10 meters tall, smashing the stone wall and pushing over. The behemoth's body structure was strange. They maintained an upright position, and their whole body was covered with metal armor. There were sharp blades and barrels. At first glance, it looked like a giant mecha. The behemoth's head was in the shape of a huge lizard's head, but it reflected a metallic luster. At first glance, it looked like a machine. Its blood-red eyes were like two diamond-shaped rubies. It wasn't a monster, but a machine. After the shock, Dean's eyes flashed. His X-ray penetrated through the behemoth's body. The scene he saw made him sluggish again. The internal structure of the behemoth was really composed of mechanical parts. However, there was a human embedded in the chest of the behemoth. There were pipes inserted into the hands, feet, neck, forehead, and other parts of the body. It seemed that their bodies were connected to the behemoth. Mecha, human. Dean was confused and couldn't respond. When he saw a beam of red light shoot out from the blood-red eyes of a giant beast and detonate a nearby cannon, he suddenly shivered. He could not help but grab Fit beside him and ask, "These are the trolls." Fet's body was shaken by Dean's grasp, and he almost couldn't sit still. He looked at Dean's eager eyes and instinctively replied, "Yes, these are the trolls." Dean felt like his brain was buzzing and somewhat blank. It took 2 seconds for him to recover, but his mood was somewhat indescribable. Before he saw the trolls, he always thought that the trolls were the same existence as the fire dragons in the East. It was possible that there was a human empire here that was not inferior to the Shenluo Empire, and the trolls were the warriors of this empire. He even thought that the magic marks in the troll's body were different from the ice worms and flame soul worms. After he got them, was it possible that he could research something that could help him improve his strength? However, at this moment, he knew that the trolls were actually mechas. At this time, the airship had started, and the start was a bit shaky, which shook Dean's thoughts. He looked at the troll mecha that was wantonly destroying, and his expression was complicated. But soon he thought of a problem. Although the troll was a mecha, but the person inside the mecha was a foreign race. In other words, there was a possibility that there was a super empire outside the southern giant wall. Moreover, the level of technology of this empire was extremely high, and they were good at technology and machinery. Moreover, this empire didn't even use the magic marks to evolve humans to cultivate soldiers. As a person of the old era, Dean advocated science in his bones. The power of science had long been engraved in his bone marrow. A little chemical could easily poison a hunter or even a pioneer. This was the charm of science. Even existences like the 7 great monarchs would most likely not be able to withstand the impact of a nuclear explosion. Just the high temperature of the explosion was enough to melt everything. Maybe I can find a way to save the undead here. Such thoughts flashed in Dean's mind for a long time, and he was a bit silly for a moment. Wait for us. Come on. Take off. Mother ***, take off. At this time, roars and roars came from the surroundings. Dean heard a few familiar voices. They were the people of the 9th Platoon. He looked down and saw a few soldiers of the 9th Platoon who had chatted during the meal. At this time, the surrounding airships were ready to take off. The pilots of these airships were aware of the danger of death when they saw the trolls. They didn't wait according to the military rules. Some airships took off and some flew in the air. The soldiers who chased after them jumped on the support under the airship and almost shook it down. Platoon leader, save us. Someone in the crowd saw Fit and hurriedly shouted. Fit's face was ugly. He gritted his teeth and didn't say anything. Chapter 1050. Roar. Right at this moment, a broken pitch-black cannon barrel suddenly flew up from below, creating a gust of wind. Not good, Dean hurriedly shouted, intending to remind the pilot. The pilot froze for a moment. Before he could react, the cannon had hit the bracket under the airship. The huge force instantly flattened the bracket and penetrated into the airship. The airship was smashed from the middle. Dean reacted in advance and dodged to the side to avoid the impact of the cannon. But the other soldier who was sitting next to Fitch wasn't able to react in time and was hit by the cannon. His legs were broken and his body was twisted. His internal organs were broken. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to live. The airship broke into two halves and fell from midair. Dean glanced around and saw a slowly rising airship nearby. He immediately stamped his feet and jumped toward the airship. He grasped the landing bracket under the airship with just enough strength. The airship slightly shook and several people on it exclaimed. They were anxious and angry when they saw Dean was holding the bottom of the airship, but they were too embarrassed to drive him away. They could only secretly pray that the airship wouldn't overload and crash because of Dean. Fitch, who was at the other end of the broken airship, fell to the ground. He crawled out of the broken iron pieces. His face was pale. He followed the other soldiers who didn't have time to take the airship. At this moment, the monsters were approaching. Even if they took the airship, it would be too late to take off. They could only rely on their legs. These are the soldiers of the border defense. Dean frowned slightly as he looked at the soldiers who were fleeing. He felt a bit disappointed and puzzled. They were able to predict the invasion of the trolls so accurately. The reconnaissance system was powerful and the war was exquisite. But why were they so vulnerable now? These soldiers had no blood. What was the difference between them and the ordinary pioneers in the giant wall? It felt like a delicate feast. The decoration was perfect, but the main dish on the plate was rotten. The so-called war was a confrontation between people. But Fitch and the other soldiers, in addition to being able to operate the artillery, didn't have the slightest sense of unity, blood, and killing intent that a soldier should have. Suddenly, Dean thought of himself. After a short training, he was sent to the battlefield and became a soldier. What did this mean? The Empire was short of people. There was a shortage of people at the border. Every time a war breaks out, there will be more or less casualties. Humans need a lot of resources to cultivate a master of the wilderness level. For the weaker giant wall, it is acceptable. But if it is a master of the wilderness, or even a dominator, then a lot of resources are needed to cultivate them. However, there were countless of such experts at the border. Every time there was a war, a large number of them would die. Even with the foundation of the empire, it was difficult to sustain such consumption. Therefore, although there were many soldiers at the border, they were not elite soldiers. Perhaps only a very small number of elite soldiers had truly received strict training. After all, to train a qualified and strong-willed soldier in such an army was not something that could be done in a short period of 1 or 2 years. It might take 3 to 5 years to get used to each other. And when such soldiers came to the battlefield, they might be exhausted in just one battle. Therefore, such elite troops were extremely few in number. Ordinary soldiers like Fitch were veterans, but strictly speaking, they were just miscellaneous soldiers. The troll race drove the monsters to attack, and then put a small number of their own people to control the direction. But the Empire has the Wall of War, so they can't drive the monsters over. They can only rely on human soldiers to resist the monsters. It's not cost-effective. Dean thought. The airship slowly ascended, flying higher and higher. The battlefield on the ground was getting smaller and smaller. The huge artillery at the moment looked as small as a palm. The troll that was more than 10 meters tall looked like a small person. As for Fitch and other soldiers who were running on the ground, they were like ants fleeing on the ground. All the soldiers sitting on the airship silently looked at the scene, although they had the heart to help. But the fear of death made them more rational. They chose a more beneficial way to survive. But as they saw their compatriots being slaughtered, eaten, and bitten to pieces by the monsters, they couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. This emotion wasn't hypocritical, but the human instinct was stimulated by the visual stimulation. Dean looked down and saw that Fitter was being overtaken by a 4 to 5 feet tall monster. The monster ejected its venomous tongue as fast as lightning as it touched Fitter's body. Fitter was sucked into its mouth and was bitten to pieces. Previously, he thought that if they were in danger, he would try to help them as much as possible. But now he could only watch them die. If he made a move at this moment, it would inevitably attract the attention of the troll. He didn't even know whether the army's intelligence system covered the battlefield or not. If it did, then it would be tantamount to exposing himself. The intelligence is wrong. How come the reinforcements haven't come yet? How come the intelligence is so slow? Dean frowned as he looked at the troll that was rushing over. He saw a troll raise its palm and eject a big net. It unexpectedly caught 3 soldiers who were running away in front of it. The big net closed, and the connecting lines quickly pulled back. The net became tighter and tighter. The 3 soldiers were strangled in the net and brought back to the troll. The 3 of them were like tigers, crocodiles, birds, and wolves. They used their sharp teeth and claws to attack the big net. But they couldn't break it. They just struggled indiscriminately, but couldn't free themselves. The troll didn't move forward but turned around and retreated along the original track. Catch them alive? Dean was startled for a moment. Soon he saw other trolls rush to the front of the escaping soldiers and eject nets from their palms. They caught the soldiers alive and brought them back. Dean suddenly came to a realization as he saw this scene. At the same time, he thought of a more terrible problem. These trolls must want to capture the Imperial soldiers to take them back for research. The troll race wants to analyze the flaws and secrets of the Empire. The Empire has been fighting with the trolls for so many years. How could they not know the secrets of the troll race? Felicia said that she saw the troll corpses being transported back to the Imperial city. The Empire has probably already dismantled the troll race long ago, including the humans inside. The Empire has long known that the troll race is just a mecha. The humans inside are of the same race as us, but the Empire has concealed the news. No one has ever heard that the troll race is controlled by humans. They have always been known as the troll race. They're on the same level as the fire dragon race in the East. It seems that the troll race wants to invade the Empire, and the Empire also wants to invade the troll race. It's very likely that the Empire has sent people to lurk in the troll race. Even the troll race may have sent spies to lurk in the Empire. It was too easy for both sides to sneak into each other's territory after a long battle. Thinking of the mutual infiltration of trolls and the Empire, Dean felt that the relationship inside was intricate. It was difficult for him to see clearly from his current position as a soldier. Only from the perspective of the 7 kings or the high-ranking military officers of the Empire could he slightly understand the relationship inside. Chapter 10:51. With a plan in mind, Dean weighed for a moment and thought of other factors. Finally, he made a decision. He loosened his grip as if he couldn't hold it stably. He screamed and fell down. Dean didn't look at the troll, but at the direction of the God of War's wall. As he thought, he didn't see any reinforcements from the abyss. A large number of trolls have appeared here and started the cannon to bombard the spaceships. The reinforcements haven't arrived yet, and the trolls are wantonly capturing the soldiers. Someone inside the giant wall has deliberately sold these people to the trolls. Is there any other reason? Dean retracted his eyes and ran behind the soldiers. But he didn't run fast. God of War's wall and trolls were enemies. It could even be said that they were old enemies. Dean didn't know how the God of War's wall would fight, but there were no reinforcements for a long time and trolls had captured the soldiers. This was undoubtedly the best evidence. There was a traitor inside the giant wall. The purpose of this battle was to provide the giant wall with soldiers of the Empire as their experimental subjects. Such means may have also appeared in the troll race. They infiltrate each other, understand each other, and swallow each other. Dean's eyes flashed as he looked at the soldiers who were getting farther and farther away from him. He called for help twice, but no one paid any attention to him. He turned his head and saw a 7 or 8 meters tall wolf jumping from behind. Its giant teeth were biting towards him. A cold light flashed in Dudian's eyes. He raised his hand to resist, but his palm instantly petrified. At the same time, his fingers turned into a sharp blade. He cut off the wolf's fangs. His fingers were like a knife as he moved upwards and pierced the wolf's head. The wolf's body hit Dean's body and pushed him back more than 10 meters. After a while, Dean crawled out from under its body. A troll happened to approach. Seeing Dean, its lizard-like eyes suddenly shot out 2 lasers. Dean's pupils shrank. When he saw its eyes were slightly bright and red, he felt danger. At the moment when the laser was shot, his whole body petrified. His arms blocked in front of his head. Puff, puff. Pain came from his arms. He looked down and saw that his petrified arms were burned with 2 small holes. Why did you kill me instead of capturing me alive? Dean's face slightly changed. Did he expose his strength by killing the wolf? But he did it covertly enough. Suddenly, Dean thought of the reason. The troll was a mecha, so it was fully equipped. Naturally, there was no shortage of sensors. Moreover, the sensors were likely to be smell, hearing, vision, and other sensing devices. It was likely that the top perception ability of the Empire was used to manufacture the equipment. Therefore, the troll had long known that he was extraordinary. Fortunately, his petrification ability was enough to withstand the giant demon's laser beam. The power of this laser beam was far inferior to the giant demon god cannon, so he was able to withstand it. I've heard that giant demons have battle prowess comparable to the abyss, but my strength isn't just abyss battle prowess. A cold light flashed in Dean's eyes, but he didn't immediately use his full strength. Instead, he stimulated his magic marks and petrified his body. He escaped to the side of the battlefield. He only used the speed and power of an elementary abyss expert. Even the heat of his blood was released to a matching degree. It seemed that he had exerted his full strength. Dean wasn't sure how sensitive the equipment of the troll was. He could only try it out. Maybe he could deceive it? The troll saw that Dean was about to turn around and escape. Iron wheels rolled out from its legs and rolled over the corpses of the soldiers on the ground. The troll's huge weight directly crushed the corpses. Cracking sounds of bones breaking could be heard. At the same time, the troll's pupils continued to shoot lasers. It seemed that it had locked onto Dean. Dean's body was petrified. Dean's whole body was petrified. His back and the back of his head were hit by the laser. He growled and grabbed the slate on the ground. His ability was activated. The slate suddenly shook into dust. It seemed that the density had shrunk. When a laser hit the slate, it penetrated the slate and lost its power. It hit Dean's body without any pain or itch. Dean was relieved. He didn't expect that he could use his ability in a crisis. Sure enough, fighting was the fastest way to improve his strength. The troll saw that the laser couldn't do anything to Dean, so it angrily chased after him. A harsh sound echoed from the top of his head. It was the siren of the old era. If one didn't know that the troll was a mecha, or didn't have the concept of mecha, then most of them would mistake the siren as the roar of the troll. The roar was so strange that it would be even more shocking. Dean found that the 2 troll mecha chased after him when the siren sounded. He knew that the siren was a signal, but he didn't expect to hear such a familiar sound after so many years. His heart was filled with nostalgia and emotion. At the same time, he felt that it was a bit funny. Dean ran all the way along the side of the battlefield and soon withdrew from the main position of the artillery regiment. The 3 troll mecha were still following closely behind him. Dean used his ability to compress the super slate and turned it into powder. He grabbed the giant trees along the way and uprooted them. The giant trees were petrified and their thickness was astonishing. The rays were easily blocked, but the weight of the petrified giant tree had skyrocketed. It swept away all the other trees on the road, making it difficult for Dean to hold it. This ability can actually change external objects. I don't know the reason. Unfortunately, I only know how to use it, but I don't know the reason, Dean said in his heart. His ability was released by instinct. Unlike other magic marks warriors, who had illustrations to refer to and the guidance of the predecessors who had the same magic marks, they knew the characteristics of the ability and knew how to use it. The 3 trolls saw that the laser couldn't do anything to Dean. The surface of the armor on their chest, arms, shoulders, abdomen, and other parts turned over. Black barrels extended from inside. Their wrists were thick and strong. They aimed at Dean, and suddenly countless shells flew over. Dean saw the situation behind him through the vision of the splitter. His heart jumped. He didn't know if he could block the petrification. Boom! Boom! The shells bombarded the stone trees. Dean smelled a strong smell of sulfur and a pungent stench. His heart was not good. The shells were actually mixed with highly toxic poison. He looked at the stone tree behind him and saw that the stone tree was full of potholes, but it was not damaged. He was relieved. He was secretly amazed at the power of his petrification ability. This tortoise shell was indeed a defensive magic mark. Damn, it's too hard. The three troll mecha didn't expect that such a violent bombardment of firepower wouldn't kill Dean. They gritted their teeth in anger. It was the first time they met such a tough defense of the lower abyss. If it wasn't for the fact that Dean's speed wasn't fast, the heat response of his body wasn't strong, and the life index detected by the troll mecha was only at the lower abyss level, they would think that he was a middle level or even an upper level abyss powerhouse. His defensive magic mark is estimated to be at the top level. Get ready to use the demon blade, the youth in the troll mecha in the middle said. His voice was transmitted to the two troll mecha next to him through the communicator. If we can capture him, he'll definitely be a good material. If we can analyze the structure of his magic mark and apply it to our troll mecha, we'll definitely make a great contribution. The eyes of the warriors in the troll mecha lit up. An abyss with a top-level defensive magic mark was most likely an important task for the Empire. If they could capture him, they could not only analyze his magic mark, but also interrogate a lot of information. It would definitely be an unimaginable contribution. Thinking of this, the three of them worked harder. Their fingers were as fast as phantoms as they operated on the virtual keyboard of the mecha. Chapter 1052. Electric Energy, Light Energy. Dean's eyes flashed as he saw the complex elements on the giant knife. It was full of destructive fluctuations. His eyelids twitched slightly as he felt a trace of danger. He looked over the troll mecha and saw that he had left the main battlefield of the artillery regiment, but he could still vaguely see the stone walls and beast roars. It was not too far away. He took a deep breath, suddenly exerted his strength, and ran madly. He sped up again. How was it possible? Wasn't that his speed limit? His magic marks are defensive abilities. How can he have such a high speed? The three people in the troll mecha were stunned. They didn't expect Dean to be able to speed up. But in the blink of an eye, the three reacted and pushed the booster forward to the maximum gear. The troll mecha slightly trembled, and a buzzing sound came from behind. Its burly body almost left the ground and quickly rushed towards Dean. He shouldn't be able to hold on for long. We must kill him. The young man in the troll mecha gritted his teeth. The two people next to him looked solemn. They also started the booster of the troll mecha and broke out the maximum speed. This speed was comparable to the limit of the agile lower-level abyss walkers. Dean sensed that the troll mecha behind him was also speeding up. His heart was a little relieved. He maintained the speed and continued to run forward for a while. Then he gradually slowed down and seemed to show signs of fatigue. The three people in the troll mecha couldn't help but be overjoyed. They were ready to catch up, but they saw Dean roar and speed up again. But this time the speed didn't last long. It gradually weakened. However, when the three people in the troll mecha were about to catch up, Dean roared again and his body accelerated again. After repeating this 4 times, the three people in the troll mecha felt a little angry and impatient. They didn't expect this alien remnant's willpower to be so tenacious. If it was an ordinary person, they would have long been squeezed dry. Once again, Dean's speed weakened. The three troll mecha quickly approached, but this time Dean was slow to increase his speed again. Soon, the troll mecha was less than 10 meters behind Dean. The troll's hand was surrounded by electric light, and the electric light was thrown out from the blade. It was like the sword energy in martial arts novels, fast as lightning. Dean, who was always paying attention, was surprised to see this and hurriedly dodged. The sword cut the ground, creating a trench of 4 or 5 meters deep. The energy of this weapon can be launched at close range. The distance should be limited. Otherwise, I would have used it before. Dean's eyes flashed. His body suddenly flew forward and once again accelerated. But this time, he did not roar in anger, nor did he appear forced. Instead, he suddenly shot out like an arrow that had left the bow. When the people in the three-troll mecha were stunned, Dean suddenly stopped. From extreme movement to extreme stillness, his body didn't shake at all. It seemed that he had been standing there for a long time. He turned around and looked at the three-troll mecha that couldn't pack up and quickly stopped. There were more than 20 meters of footprints and gear marks under their feet. The stunned faces of the three people in the troll mecha had turned into anger. From Dean's performance, they instantly understood that they had been fooled. Dean always had strength to spare, and he was hiding his strength. The young man in the troll mecha in the middle suddenly changed his face. He looked down at the map, and his heart suddenly turned cold. He saw that the three of them had been chasing crazily, but now they had completely separated from the main force. Even if they called for help now, they wouldn't be able to rush over in time, deliberately luring us out of the main force. Do you want to kill us? The young man's face was gloomy. Could it be that this attack was a conspiracy? Using these cannon fodder soldiers, deliberately arranging the abyss inside. I don't know if there are other abyss besides this one. He smelled the smell of deception and betrayal. He felt that there was a traitor among his own people, but he couldn't think about it now. You two, we've been tricked. Running away will only make our defeat worse. Let's go all out. The young man immediately communicated with the people in the two troll mecha next to him. The two people had already reacted and immediately agreed. Their expressions were dignified. They turned on all the weapon systems on the troll mecha and waited with all their strength. This language. Dean's golden eyes looked at the three troll mecha. He saw the lips of the three people inside the mecha as they communicated. He couldn't help but be slightly startled. Then he lightly exhaled and whispered, "Since you're the same race, I'll let you die quickly." As his words fell, he suddenly pounced. He's coming. The gazes of the three people in the troll mecha tightened. Just as they were about to react, their expressions suddenly changed. Their eyes were filled with shock. With a loud bang, the troll mecha on the left shattered. It had been sliced in half by something sharp. The mecha operator inside was also cut in half, right between the eyebrows of the mecha operator, and his body split into two. The young man and the other person were scared silly. It was too fast, so fast that they couldn't react in time. Bang! The troll mecha on the right was also split in half. The mecha operator inside was dead like the troll mecha. Plop! A pair of feet fell on the head of the troll mecha in the middle. The mecha sank slightly and sank into the soil. Through the screen of the troll mecha's eyes, the young man's face turned pale. He slightly raised his head and looked at the owner of the feet. There was a sharp tail blade extending from the buttocks of the troll mecha. It was obviously this strange beast tail that had broken the troll mecha. Monster! The young man's eyes showed despair. The strong fear made him unable to breathe. Come out. Let's have a chat. Dean smiled as he put away the tail blade. Hearing Dean's words, the young man was stunned. His eyes widened as he looked at Dean incredulously. His expression was more shocked than when he saw Dean's body. After a long time, he recovered. He looked at Dean sitting on the troll's shoulder, leisurely swinging his feet. He knew that he couldn't run away. After hesitating for a moment, he finally pressed the switch. The troll's chest slowly opened. The young man's seat pushed up and pushed him out. He turned around and climbed to the troll's other shoulder. Looking at the height of more than 10 meters, he took a deep breath and stared at Dean. Who are you? Why do you speak our language? Dean smiled gently. It's also my language. It's my mother tongue. Mother tongue? The young man was startled. After a long time, he said, You're from the same clan as us? Yes, you're one of us. But why did you kill them? Your magic marks. Chapter 1053. The youth looked at Dean. There was some doubt in his heart. He couldn't see any killing intent or hostility from Dean. It seemed that the previous pursuit was an illusion. From the appearance, Dean was definitely one of his clansmen. He had the same black hair, black eyes, and skin color. Moreover, he knew that their language was complex. It would be difficult for them to learn it. Even if they learned it, they would be seen through at a glance if the accent was not pure. But Dean's accent was very pure. At first glance, he knew that he was one of his clansmen. Is he a spy sent to the alien race? But why would he attack us? The youth was puzzled. After hearing Dean's words, he shook his head. We are different from these aliens. Our bodies, hair, and skin are from our parents. How can we let these dirty insects parasitize us? Even if this thing can bring us strength, it's just a worldly possession. Experts say that this thing is a double-edged sword. After the parasitic body matures, it will take away the body. So the end of this road is not hope, but destruction. Dean's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. He didn't expect that this was a secret taboo in the giant wall. But here it was known by everyone. So you don't have magic marks warriors and rely on these mechas? Dean asked. There was a bit of pride in the youth's face. Of course, these mechas are the crystallization of science and technology. We believe in the power of science and technology, not some crooked way. There are top kings inside the giant wall. Relying on this level of mecha shouldn't be a threat to them. Do you have more advanced mecha? Or more powerful weapons? Dudian pondered and asked. Of course, this is the lowest level of war mecha. We have dragon mecha and the most powerful war god mecha. The youth's face was full of pride. He suddenly realized that he had unconsciously said so much. Fortunately, these weren't important secrets. The people inside the giant wall already knew about them. He was relieved and made up his mind not to say anything more. You are one of my clansmen. Why are you inside the giant wall? Why do you have magic marks parasitic in your body? The youth turned to Dean and asked, I have my own identity. You're not qualified to know. Dean smiled. His words were blunt, but his expression was light. Don't try to inquire about my identity. Just answer my questions. The young man was startled, and then his heart was filled with rage. Suddenly, his eyelids twitched. Is he really a spy sent by my clan? If he was a spy, how could he not know anything about our clan? Strange. Could he be a remnant of our clan? No, those survivors have long forgotten our language. How could he still remember it? No. I heard you mention the word expert. It seems that your history should have recorded a lot of things from the old era, right? Dean asked him. The young man woke up from his contemplation and said with a frown, I can't tell you this before I know your identity. Why? Dean shook his head and sighed. The next moment, the sharp tail blade wrapped around the back of the troll's neck and extended to the cheeks of the youth. A monstrous, murderous aura broke out from Dean's body, making the youth's whole body shiver. It was as if there was a bloodthirsty tiger sitting next to him, surrounded by a sea of blood. Although he had been trained and had been to more than 10 battlefields, he was shocked by this sudden killing intent. His face turned pale, and his teeth trembled. You! He looked at Dean in horror. A moment ago, he felt that he might be able to survive, but now he felt like he was being held by a tiger's mouth and would die at any time. All the speculations about Dean's identity were scattered at this moment. I ask you, answer. Dean stared at him with deep eyes. The youth gritted his teeth. If you want to kill me, then kill me. I won't betray my clan. Do you have a wife? Think about your wife, children, parents, friends. Dean looked at him quietly. Is it worth it to die here? No one will remember you. Even if you're stubborn, I can find someone else. You can be stubborn, but it doesn't mean that others will be stubborn. There will always be people who are loyal to their family and willing to sacrifice. Do you have the heart to let your parents not see your body? The youth was stunned and couldn't speak. He was still unmarried, but the parents mentioned by Dean had hit his heart. Thinking of the two ordinary faces in the depths of his memory and the expectations in their eyes, he couldn't help but want to cry. Be loyal to your family, and you can be loyal to your nation. Your resistance and death are worthless and meaningless. Even if you tell me, it doesn't mean that you will betray us, because I will know it sooner or later. Dean continued to speak. His voice was flat, but like a magic sound, it drilled into the ears of the youth, guiding him. The young man sat on the mecha's shoulder in a daze. He slowly regained his senses and took a deep breath. You're right. Unfortunately, he smiled bitterly. Our ancient Huaxia only has warriors who die in battle. There are no warriors who surrender. As he said, he took out a dagger from nowhere and stabbed the youth's throat. His wrist was suddenly broken, and the dagger fell to the ground. Dean stood in front of the youth, looking at him quietly. Without my permission, how dare you end your life? The youth was stunned. The next moment, the pain of his broken hand made him scream. He held his broken hand and howled in pain. Do you know what will happen if you go against me? Dean lifted his shoulder and brought him to the ground in front of the mech. I can learn your identity from others. Find your parents, friends, your lover, your first love, anyone who is related to you. I can let them taste pain and die, but I can also let them suffer humiliation and live like dogs, begging for death. As he said, he bent down and pinched the wound of the youth's broken hand. The strength of his fingers was sometimes heavy and sometimes light. The youth screamed, and cold sweat covered his head. He looked at Dean in horror. Dean's words filled him with anger and fear. He screamed, "You are a devil, a despicable devil. Your instructor taught you to die bravely for the country, but your parents raised you for so many years. What do you use to repay them? Did you listen to their teachings? You would rather listen to an instructor you met halfway than listen to your parents. You killed them." Dean continued, and his words became sharper and sharper, like a needle piercing the ears of the youth. At the same time, golden light flashed in Dean's eyes. He completely mastered the structure of the youth's body. His fingers turned into sharp blades, and the fingertips were burning with flames, roasting the bones of the youth's palms and constantly piercing the nerves of the youth's arms. The severe pain made the youth faint on the spot, but he was awakened by Dean's slap. Dean repeatedly woke him up and subjected him to both verbal and physical torture. Chapter 10:54. Although he was struggling, the young man's physique was not high. His body's endurance was much weaker than the hunters who wandered on the edge of life and death for years. The only difference was that although the hunters inside the giant wall could endure the pain, but their faith was easily shaken. Because they often licked the blood of the knife, it led them to cherish their lives. Using life and death was easy to threaten, even if they didn't use too many means of torture. From the troll mecha that was split apart, Dean asked the young man while fumbling. He had completely mastered the black lizard-level troll mecha. Start. Dean pressed the button, and the bracket under the metal chair shrank, pulling the chair back into the chest cavity of the troll mecha. Many virtual keyboards and webcams gathered around. Please scan your iris and log in AI. 2187. An electronic voice came from above, but it was spoken in sweet Mandarin. Dean was prepared. He turned his palm, and 2 eyeballs appeared in his palm. He raised them and moved them to the iris scanning hole. Iris scanning. Scan complete. Logging in. A string of voices sounded one after another, speaking very quickly. After 10 seconds, Dean successfully logged in. He put away the 2 eyeballs of the young man, rubbed his face with his palm, and quickly made adjustments to his face. His finger quickly tapped on the virtual shoulder next to him, and a small splint popped up next to it. There was a large space inside for some personal belongings. This was a small storage room in the mecha, generally used to put purified water, dry food, and personal belongings, such as personal communicators and so on. Dean seemed to know the inside of the mecha like the back of his hand. He took out a small mirror from the bottom and looked at himself. He found that his appearance was similar to the young man, but his temperament seemed to be different. The young man's temperament was more peaceful, with a sonorous feeling of a soldier, but his temperament was restrained, and his eyes were deep, like a killer in the dark, very not easy to deal with. It seems that I have to hone my temperament. Dean slightly frowned. For him, temperament was more troublesome than appearance. Appearance could be fabricated by adjusting the bones and facial muscles. It was easy for a person with an extraordinary physique like him, but temperament was engraved in the bone marrow, and he needed to be careful to play it. Fortunately, although troublesome, it was not impossible to adjust. Dean closed his eyes and thought for a moment in his mind. When he opened his eyes again, his expression had become firm. His eyebrows were thick and his face was full of righteousness. He looked in the mirror and felt that there wasn't much difference, so he put the mirror away and jumped out of the mech. He lifted the 2 mechs beside him and threw them in 2 other places. He rearranged the scene so that no one would be able to see through it. After dealing with the scene, Dean returned to the troll mecha and drove it towards the south. As they advanced along the map, the troll mecha stumbled and stumbled. Sometimes it would crash into a small hill, smashing the hill into smithereens. The black paint on the surface of the mecha was scratched and scratched. As he passed through the grove, Dean plunged into it. From time to time, the troll's mech would hit the giant trees in the grove. The giant trees would break, but there were many branches and green leaves in the gaps between the mech's body. Searching for a location, after a continuous search, Dean finally saw other troll mech at the edge of the battle network. It was a small black dot. If there was a red dot, it represented an enemy. As the distance got closer, Dean saw more and more black dots. They gathered in groups. With a rough sweep, there were 70 or 80 of them. Dean was shocked. These troll mecha represented the combat power of the Abyss level. There were so many of them, and this was the number of mecha invested in a small battle. These black dots moved towards the south, but their speed wasn't fast. Dean chased with all his strength and slowly approached. He couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Finally, he could see the troll mecha in front of him through the screen outside the mech. More than 10 meters tall mecha were walking in the wilderness like giants. They had black, burly bodies, and some had sharp barrels protruding from their bodies. They looked like fierce hedgehogs. Are they preparing to return to the base camp? Dean's eyes flashed slightly as he slowly followed behind the troll mecha. At this time, he saw one of the troll mecha holding a big net in its hand. The net contained the soldiers inside the wall. Some of the soldiers were struggling and roaring angrily, but some had ashen faces. The group of mecha crossed mountains and rivers all the way. After walking for more than half an hour, suddenly, a troll mecha made a buzzing sound and turned to approach Dean's mecha. Then Dean heard a careless voice coming from the communicator speaker next to his ear. "Where did you run off to, kid? I thought you were dead. Why did you appear so late?" Dean turned his head and stared. Golden light flashed in his eyes. He saw that the person sitting in the mecha was a 20-year-old fat man. A trace of understanding flashed in his eyes, and he snappily said, "You smelly crow's mouth. You didn't say good things, but you almost said bad things." He adjusted his voice. Previously, when he interrogated the young man, he paid attention to his voice. He even let the young man deliberately release the sound of crying and laughing for him to hear. At this moment, he imitated it almost. *T. Did something really happen? The fat man in the mecha was startled. The mecha turned its head and looked at Dean's mecha. Suddenly, it saw the friction of the black paint on the mecha and the branches and green leaves inserted in the gaps. It exclaimed, "What happened? Is there an abyss among the enemy? It might be a middle abyss." Fortunately, I reacted quickly and ran away. But the other two who were with me didn't see their mecha, so they deliberately made an accident, Dean said in a deep voice. The fat man in the mecha was a friend of the young man. His name was Zhao Debao, and the young man was called Su Ming. Middle abyss? How is that possible? This attack was planned in advance by the higher-ups. So, didn't we lose 2 people? Zhao Debao was shocked. If the higher-ups knew that they lost 2 people, he didn't know how angry they would be. Maybe we were tricked, Dean said while gritting his teeth. Zhao Debao also thought of this. After hearing Dean's words, he immediately nodded and said fiercely, "These damn aliens. They used these small fries in exchange for our 2 mecha and 2 mechas. What a good calculation. It's also my fault." Dean sighed and said in annoyance, "When I first saw that person, I thought he was just a lower abyss. I wanted to chase after him and kill him to make a great contribution. Who knew that he actually hid his strength and deliberately lured me?" Chapter 1055. Sister sick? Dean was calm on the surface, but his heart was cold. Although he had interrogated Su Ming about his family, Su Ming didn't take the initiative to tell him about his sister's illness. He didn't expect Su Ming to face such trouble. Zhao Debao saw that Dean was silent, so he sighed and said, "In any case, solve your sister's problem first. Don't think too much about it. But this time we lost 2 mecha operators, so the higher-ups will probably interrogate you. If they want to take you to investigate, then go. I will think of a way to deal with your sister's problem." Dean nodded slightly and whispered, "Thank you." The two followed behind the troll mecha team. Zhao Debeo saw that Dean was less talkative and seemed to be in low spirits, so he found some interesting things to chat with Dean to gradually disperse the dull atmosphere. Half an hour later, the troll mecha team climbed over a towering mountain range. At the end of the horizon, they saw an open plain, and at the end of the plain, under the rainbow sunlight, a towering giant wall stood. Giant wall. Dean slightly squinted and looked at the majestic giant wall. He found that although the giant wall was majestic, it was completely different from the giant wall in the Empire. The height was only about 200 or 300 meters. Moreover, the surface of the giant wall protruded with the outline of beast heads. It was very ferocious. There were dragon heads, leopard heads, lion heads, and so on. At first glance, these monster heads seemed to be embedded in the giant wall. For monsters with low intelligence, it was enough to deter them. In addition, there were turrets, arrow towers, and beacon towers on the giant wall. It was a bit like the cities of ancient China. This is the place where they live. Dean's eyes flashed. From Su Ming, he had already learned their identity. They were the people of ancient China. They had the same blood. Most of them had the faces of Asians. They retained the long-established surnames of hundreds of families. It showed that the civilization here had not been broken, and the inheritance had not been lost. The only ancient country that had stood for thousands of years in the old era was still tenaciously standing under the catastrophe. To the south of the empire is China. The position of the empire is really in the direction of the old Russia. Dean thought in his heart. Suddenly, he thought of the buildings he saw in the giant wall of the Eastern Fire Dragon clan. All of them had the ancient Oriental architectural style. Was it also a Chinese force? The team entered the plain and came to the front of the ancient city. The troll mecha at the back opened and ejected a signal flare. The signal flare exploded in midair. After a few minutes, the sound of drums rumbled over the city. The troll mecha in the lead burst into flames beneath its feet, propelling the mecha towards the skies above the city. The rest of the troll mecha followed. Dean immediately pressed on the keyboard. He waited for the troll to take off and then follow behind it. This city doesn't have a gate. Fortunately, the mecha can fly for a short period of time. If the people inside want to go out, then there should be other means of passage. Dudian thought. Dudian found that the aisle over the city was as wide as a helipad as he flew over the city. There were many mecha, armored vehicles, transport vehicles, and so on. In addition, there were small fighters and passenger planes. Dean was a little surprised. His eyes flashed as he looked through the ground above the city. He saw that the thickness of the city was 40 to 50 meters. Behind the city, a large number of stone pillars were built to support more than 10 layers of high platforms. Each layer was more than 20 meters high. There were many weapons, fuel, gunpowder, and other things on these high platforms. In addition, there were many computers and monitors. Dean was surprised. He suddenly found that the biggest difference between the city and the giant wall was not the height, but the construction. The giant wall was a towering wall. It was bare, and the inside and outside were very smooth. It was difficult to attach to it. However, it was obvious that this city was man-made. It could hide many kinds of equipment, and every design was prepared for war and defense. The giant wall was created by the origami. This was created by humans. I don't know if there's a giant wall here, if there's an origami. Dean felt a little sour. When he interrogated Su Ming, he was pressed for time and forgot to ask about the origami. Some secrets were covered in the Empire, but standing outside the Empire, it might be easy to get the answer. However, there will be opportunities in the future, as long as I can smoothly sneak in. Dean comforted himself and slowly calmed down. He followed the troll mecha and landed. The gears under the mecha protruded. It glided along the track to the mecha's berth. As for the troll mechas carrying soldiers in their nets, they drove into an area filled with containers. There was a tower-mounted machine gun there, And when these troll mechas lifted the nets above a container, the tower-mounted machine gun instantly fired off several streaks of light. The soldiers in the big net seemed to be aware of the danger. They struggled fiercely, but were hit by the streamers. Their bodies suddenly softened. After the soldiers softened, the big net fell into the container. The top of the container was immediately closed. The next moment, there was a violent struggle inside the container, but soon calmed down. Batch after batch of soldiers were sent to the container. Some of the soldiers had higher physique and were able to avoid the streamers. However, after avoiding the first round, there was a second round. More streamers were shot until the soldiers in the big net were no longer moving. Dean sat in the troll mecha and looked at the scene from afar. His dynamic vision clearly captured that the streamers were toothpick-thin ice. When they were shot out, the thin ice quickly melted and turned into a sharp stream of water. It directly shot into the bodies of the soldiers in the big net. The effect was similar to anesthesia, but the ingredients were 100 times stronger. Some soldiers were clever. They avoided the streamers but pretended to be dead. But when they fell into the container sprayed out a thick mist. They couldn't avoid it and fainted like the others. It seems that these people will be sent for experiments. Dean silently looked at the troll mecha that fell into the hands of the giant wall. He estimated that they would end up the same way. This was war. There was no right or wrong. There were only positions. After all the soldiers were loaded into the container, the other troll mecha that were parked in the berth split open their chests. Alloy ladders extended out from inside, and the mecha operators walked out one after another. Dean and Zhao Debeo came down together. After leaving the mecha, he took out the personal items in the mezzanine, especially the personal communicator inside. It was shaped like a wristwatch, equivalent to a cell phone in the old era. He saw that the other mecha operators were wearing it. He expected that no one would neglect to leave it on the mecha. Chapter 1056. It's good that nothing happened. Dean smiled bitterly. Zhao Debeo knew what Dean was worried about. He patted Dean's shoulder and said, "What are you afraid of? It's our bad luck. You can't be blamed." "I hope so." The two followed the crowd to an alloy floor on the tarmac. When everyone stood firm, the metal floor trembled slightly and descended. The metal plate that looked like a ladder descended directly to the lowest level. In front of everyone was a passage with Chinese characters and an English translation. Everyone lined up in front of the passage and entered the portal at the end of the passage. Medical examination exit. Dean looked at the portal at the end of the passage. His eyes flashed, but he was silent. Soon, all the people in front of the team had left. It was Dean and Zhao Debeo's turn. Both of them entered the portal. They saw that it was very spacious. There were several strange instruments. When they came in, one of the instruments shined green light and scanned both of them. "Please come here." A woman in military uniform stood next to the instrument. She was valiant. Zhao Debeo was obviously familiar with the process. He cooperated and stood on the instrument designated by the woman in military uniform. Dean was taken by another woman with a round face to the same instrument on the right side for testing. "Can this thing detect anything?" Dean stood on the instrument and asked casually. There was a hint of ridicule in his tone. The round-faced woman smiled sweetly, showing 2 dimples. "This is a special device to detect the radiation dust on your body. It can only detect nuclear radiation. Please take off your combat suit." Dean took off his mecha coat, revealing his underwear. He stroked the wristwatch communicator in his hand and looked at the instrument in front of him. He saw a ring-like object on the instrument. It slowly descended on top of Dean's head. Dean had secretly used X-ray vision to look at the object inside the ring. Some of the objects were uranium crystals. At this moment, when it swept over his body, he felt a wonderful feeling in his body. His pores slightly opened, and there was a kind of indescribable comfort. He thought of the broken uranium ring he had wrapped in a simple animal skin. He had put it away on his way here and placed it with Su Ming's personal belongings. Can this thing purify the nuclear radiation in the body? Dean thought. The ring-shaped object landed at his feet, and slowly rose again. This repeated several times before the instrument stopped trembling and ended the test. The radiation value is 8. 26%. The round-faced woman looked at the data displayed behind the instrument. She frowned. "Captain, your body radiation index is close to the critical point. Please fill out this form and register for the operation." Dean frowned. He was a little unhappy, but he was relieved. When he had interrogated Su Ming for information, he had asked about the many problems he might face after sneaking in. Su Ming had already explained that every mecha operator would be tested after returning to the city. The radiation value test was only the first step. There were also magic mark tests, disease tests, and so on. This was to prevent demons from mixing in with the mecha operators, or mecha operators who accidentally contracted a strange virus while fighting outside and brought it back to the city. It seems that, as she said, it can only detect the radiation value. Fortunately, the radiation value in my body is not much. Perhaps it is because my body came from the old era. Dean thought in his heart. It was reasonable to say that he was a hunter in his early years and was imprisoned in the cave by the splitter. These 2 times should be enough to make the radiation value in his body soar, but in fact it didn't. The reason why he dared to come over for the test was that there were no accumulated dark spots or radiation mutations in his body. When the radiation exceeded the critical point of 10%, some parts of the body would have different degrees of radiation dark spots, like rotten sarcomas. When the radiation content reached about 7% or 8%, there would be mutations. For example, the woman who went to the pub to pick up the guests. Although her body was no different from ordinary people, but her private parts had long been rotten. Dean turned to look at Zhao de Bayo, who was on the other side of the instrument. He heard the valiant female sergeant in front of him said, "The radiation content is 67%, although it is high, but it is still within the control range." Zhao de Bayo was relieved and turned to look at Dean. When he saw the round-faced girl take out the form, he couldn't help but change his face. "Old Sue, your radiation content is over the limit?" Dean sighed. "When I escaped, I used the mecha once. It is estimated that I inhaled a lot of radiation at that time." Zhao de Bayo was startled. He wanted to ask in detail, but thought that this was not the right place, so he immediately held back. If the radiation content exceeded 5%, it was necessary to undergo radiation reduction treatment. Dean's radiation content was close to the critical point, so he had to undergo surgery. Otherwise, no one knew which part of the body would be affected by the radiation. This small mutation was enough to destroy a well-trained mecha pilot. Dean took the pen and filled out the form. On it was his appointment time for surgery any day within a month. He randomly picked a day, 20 days later. "Well, please come over here for the second test." The round-faced girl put away the form and registered Dean's identity. She took Dean to the second instrument. This instrument was like a coffin. The round-faced girl opened the instrument and said to Dean, "Please." Dean glanced at Zhao de Bayo and saw that he had already laid down in the instrument. Without hesitation, he also laid down in the instrument. If the magic mark is detected, the accumulated voltage inside this thing will be released in an instant. Dean thought. Although he was confident, he was still a little nervous. When the instrument was closed, Dean saw a blue light wave fall on his body, scanning him from head to toe, back and forth. A few minutes later, the instrument was opened. Dean was relieved and sat up. The round-faced girl smiled sweetly. "Captain, this way, please." Dean stood up and followed her to another room, which was used for disease detection. "I don't have magic marks in my body. This thing really can't be detected," Dean thought. He was different from other magic mark warriors. Crimson Moon had transformed his body. The splitter soul worm in his body had disappeared. It had been swallowed by his body and turned into a part of the gene chain. Later, the tortoiseshell soul worm and other soul worms were directly swallowed instead of being implanted into his body. Therefore, there was no magic nest on his body, and no magic marks were hidden in it. If he took off his clothes, his body was no different from an ordinary person, but his skin was stronger and there were no scars. Chapter 1057. The final disease detection was the most worrying step for Dean. He needed to draw blood. His blood was mixed with origami factor and several magic mark genes. He didn't know if it would be detected. He prepared for the worst. If he was exposed, he would directly enter the city and lurk. Even if they checked, with the countless residents in the city as a cover, he believed that his means were enough to hide. The round-faced girl sent Dean to the disease detection isolation room and closed the door. Inside, there were 7 or 8 people wearing white coats and masks, covering their whole heads. Dean was arranged to wait behind João de Baio. Physical characteristics were checked, blood tests, colonoscopy, X-ray scanning, and so on. In addition, there were several tests that were not available in the physical examination specifications of the old era, such as saliva testing, dandruff collection, and blood drops into a small test tube. There was a worm in the test tube. Dean saw João de Baio's blood fall into the test tube. The young centipede-like worm was soaked in it. In the blink of an eye, the blood in the test tube was reduced by a few milliliters. At this time, someone took out the worm with a pair of tweezers and extracted its blood for testing. Bloodworm? Dean asked. The male doctor who helped Dean took a look and nodded, yes. He responded to Dean's words and no longer said anything. He didn't explain. Obviously, he felt that Dean and the other mecha operators had come to test many times and naturally knew what the bloodworm was. Dean looked at the worm and thought, the bloodworm that Su Ming mentioned refers to this thing. He said that it is a special kind of worm found in the body of a monster. It belongs to a kind of parasite. Because of its special body structure, it is used as a detection tool in the border defense. The bloodworm liked demon blood. The so-called demon blood did not refer to the blood of magic mark warriors, but the blood contaminated by germs and parasites, such as the blood of various monsters. These monsters lived outside the giant wall. There were countless parasites and germs in their bodies. Any one of them was enough to infect people. Even the physically strong pioneers were not willing to drink the blood of monsters to quench their thirst. But to the bloodlust worms, the blood of monsters was a delicious meal. The various parasites and germs in the blood were their desserts, and they ate them as food. If it was pure blood, they would not be interested. Looks like João de Baio's body condition isn't very good. Dean saw a female doctor testing the blood of the worm. The worm would differentiate the germs and parasites in the blood and slowly digest them, or it would be excreted into feces. From this, one could know which germs were hidden in the blood. There were some germs that couldn't be detected with the equipment here, but if they were divided by the bloodworm, they could be found. Therefore, this was the second line of defense for blood testing. Soon, it was Dean's turn. I hope my guess is right. Dean looked at the male doctor who was drawing his blood. If the matter was exposed, he would be the first to be beheaded. The male doctor lowered his head and dripped his blood into the test tube. He had no idea that there was a pair of demonic eyes staring at him coldly above his head, and that his life could be harvested at any moment. When the blood fell to the bottom of the test tube, the worm was soaked in the blood and extended its tentacles to suck the blood. But the next moment, the worm seemed to be frightened. It suddenly retracted its hair-like tentacles. Its body violently twisted. From the front of its body, 2 big pincers drilled out of the blood and crawled out of the test tube. It seemed to want to escape from a straw. Dean could see the panic of the worm. But in the eyes of the male doctor, the worm was as big as a mung bean. As for the tentacles, they were even less visible. He saw that the worm wanted to crawl out of the test tube and didn't want to stay inside. Little worm wants to escape. The male doctor took out a pair of forceps and clamped the worm. Then he took the blood test. It didn't suck my blood. Sure enough, it is afraid of the origami factor in my blood. Although the little thing doesn't have much wisdom, but its instinct for danger is still there. But also shows that the origami factor is too terrible. If it sucks my blood, it will definitely be swallowed. Dean thought. Soon, the male doctor took out the test report of the worm. He glanced at it and nodded. Healthy. Dean nodded slightly. The worm had been raised by them. There were no germs in its body, and it didn't suck his blood. Naturally, the result was normal. 10 minutes later, Dean and Zhao Debeo took their respective medical reports and left the quarantine center. I have a little cold. Fortunately, I didn't get infected with anything from the demon race. Zhao Debeo patted his chest and said with lingering fear, "When I saw the doctor frown, I thought there was a big problem with me." Dean glanced at his medical report. Except for the cardiopulmonary function test, which showed that he was not very healthy and needed to exercise, everything else was qualified. It could be said that he had successfully sneaked in for the time being. However, his medical report would be entered into the computer and compared with Su Ming's medical report. At that time, it would be found that their blood types were not the same. Their other physical conditions were also quite different. If they wanted to identify them, they would find out that they were not the same person. However, Su Ming said that the medical reports of the mecha operators were A-level files. Only specialized managers were qualified to look at them. Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't look so carefully. After all, there were so many mecha operators who would remember the data of their previous physical reports. As long as they were qualified, everything would be fine. In any case, there is still the danger of being reported. I must find a new identity as soon as possible. First, I have to get familiar with this place as soon as possible. Dean thought in his heart. "Are you okay?" Zhao Debeo saw that Dean didn't answer, so he touched his shoulder with his arm. "Is there something wrong with your body? If there are any suspicious speculations, you have to go to the hospital in time. The physical examination here may not be able to detect everything." Previously, there was an unlucky guy. A strange insect flew into the mecha's exhaust port and drilled into his neck. He said that his neck was bitten by a mosquito, but the mecha was so clean. How could there be a mosquito? Later, the physical examination didn't find anything. Not long after, he felt uncomfortable. He went to the hospital for a checkup. It was found that he was sick. Moreover, it was incurable. Finally, he had to be sent to the crematorium to be destroyed. I heard that at that time, his body was full of parasite eggs. His saliva was filled with white eggs. It was very disgusting. Dean's heart shivered. If the physical examination here can't detect anything, then there is no hope in other places. That's not necessarily true. Although the inspection here is strict and the equipment is advanced, but if you really feel that there is a problem, you can go to the Saint Research Institute to check. It's just that the cost is relatively high. Zhao Debeo said. "That's why I said there is no hope." Dean secretly noted in his heart. At the same time, he pointed to himself with a relaxed face. "Did you forget that I need money?" Zhao Debeo's face slightly changed. "Do you really feel uncomfortable?" "No. Didn't you see my medical report? I'm healthier than you. I haven't left the mecha, nor have I been bitten by a mosquito. It's impossible for insects to fly into the mecha and parasitize me." Dean shrugged. Zhao Debeo stared into his eyes. "You are not lying to me? I'm a dog if I lie to you." Dean also looked at him seriously. He was very serious. He was afraid that Su Ming's close friend would secretly find him some advanced medical equipment to help him check. Zhao Debeo was relieved. "That's good. In any case, life is the most important. Anyway, we can earn money in the future. It's not a big deal to do a few more missions." Dean nodded. At this time, the two came to a small helicopter. The person on the helicopter saw the two dressed up and waved. "It's just enough for 3 people. Let's go." The middle-aged man on the helicopter was also a mecha operator. He had finished the medical examination in front of Dean and Zhao Debeo. Dean and Zhao Debeo sat on the helicopter. The helicopter started and slowly lifted off. Zhao Debeo didn't talk about private matters with Dean since they were outsiders. Instead, he talked to the man about the mission. Inevitably, he cursed a few vulgar words about the demon bastards. Dean looked at the scenery outside the helicopter. It was very empty and sparsely populated. Because it was near the edge of the city, once the war broke out, the army would be hoarded here. It was not suitable to be developed into a bustling neighborhood. They had to take a plane for more than half an hour to go back to the military headquarters. It was hundreds of miles away. Beep! Suddenly, a slight vibration sounded from his wrist. Dean was startled. He looked down at his watch. There was a message popping up on it. "Is it your sister?" Zhao Debeo stopped talking with the middle-aged man and suddenly looked over. Dean saw that there was no name displayed on the communication device. It was not in the address book. He couldn't help but frown. He picked up the call and heard a male voice. "Is it Mr. Su Ming? Your sister is in the operating room. She is ready for the operation. Please be sure to be there." Operating room? Dean's pupil shrank. He was about to ask which hospital, but suddenly thought of something. He changed his words. "I'll go right away. You go ahead with the operation. Be sure to use the best doctors." Then he took the initiative to hang up the communication. Zhao Debeo's face changed. "Your sister is going to have an operation?" Dean was so anxious that his legs kept shaking. He suddenly thought of something and shouted, "Oh no, I forgot to ask which hospital it is." Chapter 1058. Can I trouble you to fly faster? Dean asked the pilot in front of him. The pilot also heard the situation and nodded. "We will arrive soon. Don't worry." "Thank you," Dean said gratefully. He rubbed his palms and looked impatient, but in his heart he was thinking. He had interrogated Su Ming about a lot of things, but it was inevitable that he would be negligent. His sister's illness was the biggest oversight at present. He must be careful not to expose himself. Otherwise, not only would his hands be stained with blood, but he would also add trouble to himself. Helicopters flew past one vast apron after another. Some aprons had fighter aircrafts parked on them, while others had rows of troll mechas. Many people were driving around in repair vehicles, repairing and inspecting these mechas. Suddenly, at the end of the apron, in front of a lush forest, stood a simple and unadorned statue. It was more than 200 or 300 meters high. It was a man with a Western face. He had a handsome and extraordinary appearance, wearing a crown. One of his hands was holding a holy fire, and the other hand was holding a book. His feet were wrapped in chains. The Statue of Liberty? Dean saw the familiar posture and was stunned. He had interrogated Su Ming about the beliefs of the people here, and Su Ming had given him the answer of the god of science and technology. Could it be that this was the god of science and technology? But this shape was completely copied from the Statue of Liberty of the United States. But this person also had a European face. Dean had a messy feeling. In his mind, he couldn't help but think of the early days of the disaster. A survivor led the rest of the people to survive, reproduce, gain the right to rule, and then cast himself such a statue of the Statue of Liberty. How boring this person is. Dean's mouth slightly twitched. He noticed that Zhao Debeo and another middle-aged man had a solemn look on their faces. They were in awe. Their heads were also consciously bowing down. The helicopter circled around the statue, but didn't directly fly over its head. It could be seen that this statue was of extraordinary significance. Dean wanted to ask and confirm the identity of the statue, but he didn't know how to open his mouth. He sighed. "Every time I see it, I think it's too handsome. It's simply impeccable." Zhao Debeo patted his shoulder and smiled. Of course, the god of science and technology is a god with both wisdom and beauty. Compared to those origami monsters of the Nephilim race, this is a true god. Those origami are all paralyzed in the lower half of their bodies. They are obviously demons, but these Nephilim race still worshipped him as a god. As expected, demons believe in demons, while humans believe in gods. Indeed, the god of science and technology. Dudian thought in his heart. He remembered that the lower body of the origami was a hideous monster. He couldn't help but be dumbfounded. It was indeed possible. It was impossible for God to exist. The origami was either an alien race or a hybrid of the first generation of warriors and monsters. However, he had heard that the origami existed in the early days of the war between humans and the insects. The helicopter flew over the lush forest. After a long time, he saw steel buildings standing at the end of the forest. They were like dense, silvery bamboo shoots inserted into the ground. In addition, Dean saw that there were tracks around the steel buildings. It was like a playground slide. He was puzzled when he saw a maglev train coming from the distance. It stopped next to one of the steel buildings. Then he saw the maglev train open. A lot of people came out of the train and went into the steel building. The level of technology is so high. Dean was shocked by the image of the future city. He didn't expect that the people's fantasy would come true. Even a maglev train could gallop in the air. Although it was still far from the real maglev train as it needed to rely on the tracks, but it was already a great progress. If the technology of the old era hasn't been cut off, then after more than 300 years of development, it is indeed possible to reach such a level, or even far beyond. Dean's eyes flashed. He felt the blood in his body boiling. The technology here was much higher than what he had imagined. No wonder they could create a huge war machine like the troll mecha. After a moment, the helicopter stopped on the roof of a steel building. Dudien and Zhao Debeo quickly got off the helicopter. Dudien deliberately panicked when he got off the helicopter. He tripped and fell down. He was in a very embarrassing state. Zhao Debeo was shocked and quickly came forward to support him. "Are you okay? It doesn't matter. Take me to Anhai Hospital." Dean clenched his teeth and pretended to be in pain. Zhao Debeo saw that his face was red, but he didn't try to persuade him. He immediately helped him to walk quickly. Dean let Zhao Debeo lead the way. They took the elevator from the side of the steel building. It was inconvenient for him to move, so Zhao Debeo pressed the button and went directly to the maglev elevator floor. After getting out of the elevator, Zhao Debeo took Dudien to an extension of the exhibition stand and waited for him. A moment later, a whistling sound came from a fast place. 4 or 5 seconds after the sound was transmitted, a silver-white maglev train rushed along the track and stopped right next to the booth. 2 doors opened. A lot of people came out of one compartment, while the other compartment was for people to enter. Zhao Debeo helped Dean into the compartment and saw that there were a lot of empty seats in the compartment. Zhao Debeo helped Dean to sit on the chair and put on the seatbelt. Seeing that Dean's hands and feet were inconvenient, he also helped him put on the seatbelt. "Thank you," Dean whispered. Zhao Debeo laughed. "Don't worry, we'll be there soon." Then he pointed his watch at the lens in the middle of the seatbelt. Dean noticed that there were a lot of mecha like them in the carriage. After fastening the seatbelt, they did the same action. He immediately raised his hand and scanned the seatbelt with his watch. It didn't take long for the maglev train to start. In just a few seconds, it accelerated to a few hundred miles. The scenery outside the window instantly became gorgeous. When the track curved, the maglev train also curved and flipped up and down. It was like riding a roller coaster in an amusement park. But the gravity in the carriage was constant. When the train flipped, the people in the carriage didn't feel that they were flipped unless they saw the scenery outside the window. The maglev train passed in front of a steel building, stopped, and started again. Half an hour later, they came to a steel building. Zhao Debeo pressed the middle button of the seatbelt on his chest and got off with Dean. After arriving at the steel building, they took the elevator down to the bottom of the building. There was a subway track here. These buildings are actually parking stations. There are lounges and entertainment venues on each floor. It's too luxurious. Dean glanced at the whole building with his X-ray vision when Zhao Debeo was not paying attention. He couldn't help but be amazed. He felt as if he had come to the future world of technology. Chapter 1059. Under the leadership of Zhao Debeo, Dean entered the hinterland of the modern, no, to be precise, futuristic metropolis. The moment the train came out of the ground, Dean had a feeling that he was riding a time machine to return to the old era. The familiar three-dimensional box buildings, traffic lights, roads, everything was projecting the shadow of the old era. Is this the last shelter of the old era survivors? Dean looked at it in a daze. Suddenly, there was a kind of inexplicable gratification and sadness. His father gave him the super chip, but he inexplicably appeared in a giant wall of the Shenluo Empire, where he experienced hardships. If this was the place where he woke up at the beginning, would he have lived a happy life in the past 10 years? He thought for a while, but soon shook his head. Even if he woke up here, his life would be 100 times more comfortable. I will never meet her in this life. What's the point of everything? After a while, Zhao de Bao brought Dean to a magnificent hospital. The reason why it was magnificent was that the hospital was like a university. In front of the hospital stood a 10-meter stone tablet of the god of science and technology. There were gardens, grasslands, pools, and beautiful birdwoods. The main entrance of the hospital was extraordinary. The pedestrians were in a hurry, but they were orderly. Only a faint smell of medicine floated out from the inside, which made Dean frown slightly. Zhao de Bao rushed into the hospital, took the elevator, and came to the front desk on the 24th floor. We are Su Mingzhu's family members. Which operating room is she in? Please show me your ID. The nurse at the front desk said expressionlessly. Dean handed over his wristwatch. This wristwatch was not only a communicator, but also recorded a lot of information related to him. It was equivalent to an identity card. The nurse at the front desk scanned the wristwatch with an instrument, and Dean's identity information popped up on the computer. She glanced at it, and her face suddenly changed color. She looked at Dean in surprise and quickly said, "It turns out to be Mr. Mecca. Hello, your sister Su Mingzhu is in room C8. Please come with me." After that, she came out from the front desk and personally led the way for Dean. Dean asked as he walked, "Has my sister's operation started?" The nurse shook her head. "Not yet. The family hasn't arrived yet, and the money hasn't arrived yet. So she is temporarily recovering." Dean was furious. "Isn't the situation critical? Why don't you perform the operation first?" "This is the rule. Please forgive me," the nurse said while trembling with fear. Dean was full of anger. He followed him to room C8, opened the door, and saw that there were 4 beds in this ward. There were metal covers around the beds, isolating the beds. It was quite high-end, but Dean turned a blind eye to it and said angrily, "Why not a separate ward?" "Sir, your sister's medical expenses have not been paid, so—" The nurse was embarrassed, but her good impression of Dean was gone. She secretly despised him. Pretending to be angry, he was obviously a mecha operator, but he did not pay his sister's medical expenses, and he still has the face to blame me. Dean clenched his fists. Under the guidance of the nurse, they came to a bed covered with a white metal cover. He saw the nurse press the metal cover. Inside was a pale girl wearing a hospital gown, about 17 or 18 years old. "Brother?" When the girl saw the face outside the metal cover, she couldn't help but be startled. Then, she exclaimed in pleasant surprise, "You're here." Dean's heart was slightly touched. He suddenly thought of his sister. He took a deep breath and stepped forward to hold her hand. "Don't worry, I'm here. I'll definitely cure your lung cancer." When he entered the ward, he used his X-ray vision to scan the situation in the room when the nurse and Zhao de Bao were not paying attention. The other 3 beds were occupied by 2 old men and a middle-aged woman. Only this girl matched his sister's age, so he confirmed her identity and took the opportunity to scan her body. At a glance, he could see that Su Ming's sister had lung cancer. The area where the cancer cells had spread was not small, and there were traces of resection. Obviously, she had an operation before, but the cancer cells had not been eradicated. Generally speaking, the probability of women getting lung cancer was very low. After all, women did not like smoking as much as men, let alone such a young girl. Although Dean was puzzled, he soon thought that it might be because of the environment. He needed to know more about it. Hearing his words, Su Mingzhu bit her lips slightly and whispered, "Brother, I've caused you trouble again." Dean rubbed her head. "Fool, this is no trouble. I've even killed demons. How can I not overcome this little disease in your body?" Su Mingzhu smiled. "I know, brother. Don't worry. This time the situation is not that bad. I can still be saved." Dean could not help but smile, but he did not continue to talk with her. He turned to the nurse and said, "How much is the operation fee?" "I don't know the specific amount, but if your sister has lung cancer, the operation fee is generally between 200,000 to 400,000 federal coins." The nurse quickly said. Dean frowned and his face slightly sank. "Do the operation first. I'll help you get the money." At this time, Zhao de Bao said, "You just paid off your debt. You can pay me back when you get your salary next month. Dean looked at him. He knew that Zhao Debeo said this not because he wanted him to pay back the money, but because he was afraid of hurting his self-esteem. Although Su Ming was dead, he still had a good brother. However, he felt that it was not necessary. Even if Zhao Debeo did not give him face, he would kneel and beg for money to treat his sister. In the face of life and death, how much was face worth? Thank you. Dean patted him on the shoulder. In his heart, he secretly thought that Su Ming was most likely a guy who cared about face. Otherwise, he would not let his brother care about face so much. Seeing that he agreed, Zhao Debeo was relieved and immediately ordered the nurse. Soon, the doctor came and sent Su Mingzhu to the operating room. Dean and Zhao Debeo waited outside. Dean secretly calculated in his heart. He did not expect Su Ming to still be in debt. No wonder a mecha operator had no money to treat his sister's illness. But speaking of which, mecha operators were considered to be a profession of guarding the border. How could his relatives not get free medical treatment? He felt that it was necessary to go back to the army to familiarize himself with the treatment and benefits of mecha operators. By the way, he could understand the social structure here through the military. Not long after, Su Mingzhu was sent out. Dean glanced at her with his X-ray vision and found that the cancer cells in her chest and lungs had been removed. His heart was relieved. Although the fees here were high, the medical level was much better than in the old era. Stay in the hospital and recuperate. I have to go back to report. I can't accompany you anymore. I'll see you when things are over. Dean said goodbye to his sister. Su Mingzhu was very weak. She barely said a few words and fell asleep. After walking out of the hospital, Dean was secretly relieved. He knew that the danger had finally passed. Let's go back, Dean said to Zhao Debeo. Zhao Debeo nodded. He helped the injured Dean to ride the railway in the city and went back and forth. When it was dark, the two returned to the military headquarters. The military headquarters was in a remote suburb outside the city. It was very secretive. There were sentries hidden within 100 miles of the military area. There should be a lot of technology monitoring this place. When the two entered the military base, they needed to enter the iris and scan their identity. Dean let Zhao Debeo go first. After the scan, he quickly took out Su Ming's eyeball and swayed it over the iris. The scan passed. Su Ming's eyeball was completely frozen at the moment. It was not rotten. Dean used the heat control ability of the Sun Beast magic mark to lower the temperature around the eyeball. He froze it out of thin air. The underground base was like the intestine of an insect machine. There were intricate passageways and checkpoints. Many of the checkpoints on the periphery needed to be scanned. Dean was worried that there were surveillance cameras in the passageways. Before the scan, he secretly retracted one of his eyeballs into the soft tissue of the skull. Then he pressed Su Ming's eyeball into his eye socket. It felt very cold and uncomfortable, but it was still within the range of his pain tolerance. Chapter 1060. Sergeant Su Ming, Commander Li is looking for you. Dean and Zhao Debeo returned to the reporting hall of the base. After they had finished their registration, a young man with a bear-like physique found Dean and asked him to see Commander Li. It's okay. Zhao Debeo winked at Dean and patted his shoulder. Dean nodded and followed the young man through the corridor. A checkpoint twisted open like a fan, and inside was a spacious office. Commander Li, Sergeant Su Ming is here. The young man put his hand on his chest and bowed. In front of the office sat a middle-aged man with a dignified face. His beard extended from his sideburns to his chin, shaping his face into a deep and masculine face. It was an Asian face. He stared at the monitor on the desk and said without raising his head, "Got it. You can leave now." The young man retreated, leaving Dean alone. "Commander." Dean used the same gesture to salute. The middle-aged man slowly raised his eyes, and his eyes were indifferent. "Tell me about Kai Zhongkong and Sun Yong." Dean took a deep breath and repeated the words he had said to Zhao Debeo. This time, it was more detailed, including how to pursue and how to escape. The abyss that split the black lizard. Commander Lee's finger lightly tapped on the table. After a long time, he suddenly looked at Dean, and his eyes were sharp. So, in the end, you became a deserter? Dean quickly said, Leader, I didn't escape because I was afraid. I wanted to bring back this information. I think that on the battlefield, you can't be called a warrior. You can play your value and be called a warrior. Commander Lee slightly raised his eyebrows and snorted. Glib tongue. As a soldier, you didn't respond properly to an accident. You didn't take responsibility after the accident. If everyone was like you and talked about escaping, how could we fight this war? Huh? Dean was trembling. He didn't dare to say anything and lowered his head. His heart was relieved. I know your situation. Your father's company went bankrupt and owes a huge debt. You need to repay it, so you're in urgent need of money. But the battlefield is not a child's play. Don't be blinded by money. This time, because of your negligence, 2 comrades died. How will you face their families? Commander Lee looked at him coldly. Please punish me. Dean buried his head lower. The sharpness in Regiment Commander Lee's eyes gradually disappeared. He said indifferently, It's good that you know your mistake. Remember, don't tell anyone about this. There are too many things involved. Be careful not to attract unnecessary trouble. Dean's eyes flashed, and he nodded. Thank you for reminding me. Remind me? Smart. Regiment Commander Lee thought to himself. He waved his hand indifferently. Go down. I have high hopes for you, but that doesn't mean I can tolerate you making mistakes again and again. You can't do it twice. Dean respectfully bowed his head and retreated. Smelly brat. He must be scared out of his wits after this incident. His brain is more flexible than before. Commander Lee looked at Dean's back and thought, It seems that there is a problem with their operation. There must be a traitor within the military or a spy placed in the giant wall. This matter involves a lot of important people. I should not get involved in this muddy water. I should familiarize myself with this place as soon as possible and then leave. Dean thought of Regiment Commander Lee's words and speculated in his heart. He quickly left the place and returned to his dormitory in the barracks. You're back. Are you okay? Zhao de Bayo and Dean lived in the same dormitory. When he saw Dean coming back, he quickly asked. Dean shook his head and looked relieved. I'm fine. I told you about the situation. Regiment Commander Lee just told me not to spread it out. Don't tell anyone about this matter. It will save you trouble. Zhao de Bayo's eyes turned cold. He nodded and said, I know. It's good that you're okay. I want to go back to see my sister. Do you want to go? Dean deliberately invited him. Zhao de Bayo shook his head. I want to go, but we can't go. I know you are worried about your sister. But don't do stupid things and violate the military discipline. When there are holidays in the future, I will go with you to see your sister. Or we can go after the next battle. Dean was silent and a little depressed. He knew that it was not so easy for the mecha operators to enter and leave the barracks. But listening to Zhao de Bayo's words, even though they had just finished the battle, they did not have holidays. It could be seen how strict the control was on them. Next, Dean pretended to be in a bad mood. He lay down on his bed and sorted out his personal belongings. There were a few books. He picked them up and looked at them. 2 were about mecha knowledge. One was a storybook, and the other was a booklet. It recorded the rules and common knowledge of mecha operators. Dean was happy. He pretended to casually pick up the storybook and looked at it. At the same time, he sensed his surroundings. He saw that Zhao de Bayo's attention was gradually shifting away. It seemed that Zhao de Bayo wanted him to be quiet. He slowly put down the storybook in his hand and pretended to be bored to death. Su Ming had obviously read the things written in the booklet. It was a must-read for every mecha operator. He could even memorize it. But for him, these things were very useful. Mecha Operators Rules. 1-star mecha operator's monthly salary is 100,000 federal coins. During non-war period, 8 hours of mecha training every day. 3 mecha competitions a week. Dean quickly flipped through the booklet. He finished it in a few minutes and casually threw it aside. Then he picked up a book about mecha knowledge and casually flipped through it. His mind was thinking quickly. I didn't expect these mecha operators to have such an easy life. If it wasn't for the condition of 5-star mecha operator hindering him, he would have been excited after reading this booklet. He would have become a 5-star mecha operator in any case. Then he could get a Genesis god mecha and have combat strength comparable to the king of the Empire. However, it wasn't difficult for him to become a 3-star mecha operator. He could easily meet the requirements of brain and body. If he spent more time, it wouldn't be a problem to become a 4-star mecha operator. As for becoming a 5-star mecha pilot, he would be able to complete the test in another 2 months. Although a 5-star mecha pilot would need to reach the level of a grandmaster in terms of military tactics in addition to piloting, they would also need to have a vast amount of mecha knowledge, as well as many other types of knowledge. However, all of these were things that he could learn. The only thing he couldn't do was for a 5-star mecha pilot would have to surrender all of their loyalty. Chapter 1061. Dean wasn't in a hurry to take the Mecha Master exam. Instead, he flipped through the 2 mecha-related books on Su Ming's bedside. After reading these 2 books, he realized how right he was to be cautious. These 2 books completely subverted the concept of mecha in his mind. Even though he had previously interrogated Su Ming about the operating methods of mecha, he had only been able to understand the basics of operating mecha. His understanding of mecha itself came from the imagination of science fiction stories and movies from the olden era. However, the Federation's mecha wasn't a battle weapon assembled by metal machinery. Its structure was extremely complex, and it was even like a living body. The titanium alloy shell, the complex arteries, and the coolant recovery fluid and other substances flowing in the arteries were like the blood of the mecha. In addition, the mecha was like a human. The heart and the brain were the core of the mecha. The brain carried the calculation and intelligent host of the mecha, and the heart was the core of the energy. All the energy needed for the mecha was output from the heart. It's not a simple fuel energy, nor is it nuclear energy or electric energy. This is a brand new energy source. Dean muttered to himself. 300 years had passed. The wise people who survived had developed a brand new energy source. This energy source could make the mecha appear on the scene. It could erupt with terrifying, inhuman power. It could also drive thousands or even tens of thousands of tons of spaceships into the sky. If I can get the manufacturing blueprints of these mecha, I can control an army of lions. As long as I have the resources, I can continue to expand. This is much faster than cultivating an abyss. It can help me overthrow the Empire in the fastest speed, control the Empire, and then find her. Dean's eyes were getting brighter and brighter. He couldn't help but be excited. It was too difficult to overthrow the 7 kings of the Empire by himself. However, if a team of Abyss Lions were to descend into the Imperial capital, it would be enough to help him suppress the forces under the 7 great kings. In fact, if he could create a creator god mech, he would have enough power to fight against the 7 great kings. The reason why the Federation and the Empire were in a stalemate for so many years was very complicated. Perhaps the Federation was the same as the Empire. There were enemies at the borders that they had to deal with, or the forces of the Empire had infiltrated each other. But Dean felt that the main reason was that the Federation's attacks were unable to cross the God of War wall. The Empire made use of the geographical advantage of the Battle God wall. It was easy to defend and hard to attack. They only needed to invest half of their forces to defend it. The Federation, on the other hand, might have other reasons, or perhaps it was because they weren't united enough or because they had too many interests at stake, which prevented them from launching an all-out assault on the Empire. Otherwise, just the giant demonic divine cannon alone would have been enough to inflict heavy losses on the Empire's border guards. If it wasn't for this 3,000-meter-tall, miracle-like battle god wall, the Empire might have long been annihilated. However, for Dean, he had a way to sneak over the war god's wall. If he could drop a large number of mechas into the Empire's capital, it would be enough to cause the greatest destruction. That giant demon god cannon can probably obliterate even a king, and even pierce through a spaceship in one shot. No matter how strong a king's body is, it can't compare to titanium alloy. However, these kings have strange abilities. If their bodies aren't completely turned to ash, they might be able to survive even if their heart is pierced, just like Crimson Moon. Dudian thought in his heart. The Federation had technological weapons that could deter the kings. If he learned how to make them, then it would be the beginning of his campaign. The next day, Dean, Zhao de Bayo, and other dormitory roommates went out together to the mecha training room in another part of the base. This training room was very spacious. It was a public training room. There was no mecha inside. The training relied on a simulation helmet and a smart computer for training. Different combat fields could be set up. There were plains, deserts, swamps, hills, forests, and other different environments. At the moment, there were 20 to 30 people training in the training room. Dean and Zhao de Bayo picked 2 simulation training machines. They put on helmets, scanned the iris, and logged into the mecha. Dean deliberately took Zhao de Bayo to a remote seat. He waited for Zhao de Bayo's headset to hear the electronic voice registering mecha. He quickly took out 2 frozen eyeballs from his pocket and stuffed them into the eye sockets. The light of the iris scanned shone through the helmet. An electronic synthetic female voice came from the headset. Identity scanning. Identity entering. Staff Sergeant Su Ming. Do you want to start the simulation training? Yes, Dean said. At the same time, he quickly dug out the 2 frozen eyeballs and put them into his pocket. Then he took a deep breath and squeezed out his own eyes. At this time, the scene in his line of sight was no longer in the training room. Countless streamers flew over and then entered a row of many mecha. These mecha had strange shapes. Some looked like a human-shaped wild boar with 2 fangs on its head. Some looked like a tiger lying on the ground. Among these mecha, only the black lizard mecha that Dean had seen was not black and white. Su Ming is a soldier. His identity is bound. He can only choose this military black lizard mecha to train. The other mecha are commercial and entertainment mecha developed by the company that manufactured this training system. Dean had already understood the situation in front of him from a booklet. After a brief glance at the other mecha shapes, he chose the only military black lizard mecha to train. After choosing the mecha, he began to choose the scene and difficulty. The difficulty was divided into 6 levels: beginner, intermediate, advanced, difficult, master, and abyss. The black lizard mecha was a 1-star mecha, so these difficulties were also 1-star. When he completed the master difficulty, it meant that his operating level could steadily pass the 2-star mecha pilot assessment. As for the abyss difficulty, it should be the full potential of the black lizard mecha simulated by the AI. If a human operated it, it would be impossible to pass unless it was as perfect as the AI without any mistakes. This was the first time Dean played with a mecha, so he was somewhat curious and looking forward to it. He didn't make things difficult for himself. He first chose a plain environment. When choosing the difficulty, he found that beginner and intermediate were gray. He couldn't choose the lowest difficulty, which meant that Su Ming had already passed the intermediate difficulty and reached the advanced level. Among the 1-star mecha pilots, he was considered an above-average talent. After choosing, the interface in front of him quickly broke and the actual combat scene loaded. After a moment, Dean found himself in a mecha. Looking out from a mecha's rearview mirror, he saw that he was surrounded by a plane. He looked down and saw that all the buttons were the same as in the black lizard mecha. The simulation was very realistic. At this time, the countdown of the battle came from above. Dean looked around and put his hands on the console. With the start of the battle, 8 beams of light appeared around him. When the light dispersed, there were 8 monsters formed by virtual data. Their bodies were huge, and they were actually 8 wolves with a body length of more than 10 meters. These wolves had dark blue fur, agile bodies, mouths full of fangs, dripping saliva, and let out a low growl. Like real monsters, they surrounded the mecha. Soon, the first wolf took the lead and rushed over from behind Dean. Dean's eyes turned cold, and his hands quickly reacted on the console. He lifted the joystick, and the mecha slid sideways, avoiding the wolf's attack. At the same time, he used a super fast hand speed to activate the mecha's laser knife. He lifted the knife and pierced the wolf's abdomen from bottom to top, cutting it into two. At this time, the other 7 wolves howled and rushed over at the same time. Dean's eyes turned cold, and he used a super fast hand speed to activate the mecha's thruster. For a short moment, he soared up, and the machine gun on his body ejected. Bullets fell like a curtain of rain, bombarding the wolves below into the dust. At the same time, he used a super fast hand speed again. While attacking, he opened the infrared detector and saw the shadows of 7 wolves in the thick fog. He immediately went to kill the wolf at the edge. The laser knife of the mecha was very flexible in his hands. One knife cut the wolf in half, and then he went to kill the other wolves. Soon, he killed 3 of them. At this time, the remaining 4 wolves locked onto him, roaring and rushing over at the same time. Dean turned the joystick in his hands, and his fingers were as fast as a phantom. The mecha's feet suddenly emitted smoke, and the next moment, it suddenly spun in place. The laser knife in his hands was raised horizontally, and the beautiful knife light turned into a circle. The 4 wolves that rushed over were killed at the same time. When the 4 wolves' bodies turned into white light and disappeared, Dean heard the voice saying congratulations on passing. He could not help but be startled, and then he was relieved. He did not expect to pass the high difficulty on his first try. It seemed that after he was completely familiar with it, it would not be long before he could become a 3-star mecha master. He could then take leave from the base and go outside to understand the comprehensive picture of the Federation. When the screen returned to that page, Dean saw a screen full of jubilant pictures, which made his mood better. He then continued to choose the next difficulty. While Dean was immersed in the training of mastering the mecha, in an office of the Federal Mecha Military Archives Management Headquarters, a 27-year-old young man made himself a cup of coffee, yawned, and looked at the computer in front of him that kept flashing with data. His task was to manage the files of all the soldiers of the 3rd District's Border Mecha Military Headquarters. However, although it was said that he was in charge, in fact, these files were managed by the AI and did not need to be manually operated. Therefore, his position was quite idle to the point that he wanted to go to work and play games. Unfortunately, this archives management department blocked all external signals and also cut off internal signals. He could only be in a daze, unable to do anything. Suddenly, a notification popped up on the computer in front of him. Soldier's information is abnormal. Abnormal? The young man was just about to get up and stretch his neck. When he saw this notification, he could not help but be stunned. He immediately opened it, and a page of information popped up, recording all the information of a soldier. Chapter 1062. The battle ended on the afternoon of the 21st. The young man looked at the recent battle time and details of the 3rd region, and then looked at the soldiers' information that had been entered into the database. The latest update time was the 21st. The young man was confused. After thinking for a moment, his face suddenly changed. Not good. A demon has sneaked in. He suddenly got up and was ready to report this matter to the military and let the military find the demon's spy. However, after his finger opened the contact list on the communicator, the name at the top of the list suddenly made him wake up. He immediately took the lead to click on this name and reported the matter. A demon spy has sneaked into the military? A gentle male voice came from the back of the communicator. After hearing the young man's words, he fell into silence and seemed to be thinking. The young man responded and did not dare to urge. Even though it was through the communicator, his back could not help but slightly bend slightly, and his attitude was humble. After a while, the gentle male voice spoke again. Contact Little Six and let him enter the mecha training system from the background and check this person's mecha training situation. In addition, there is no need to report this matter to the military. Send me a copy of this person's information. The young man was startled and quickly nodded. Got it, boss. In the mecha training room of the base, Dean appeared in a swamp area. There were demon crocodiles swimming in the swamp, their backs like dead trees. He felt the mecha gradually sinking, and his legs had sunk into the mud. The environment of the abyss difficulty was not optional, and the system would change it accordingly. Perhaps during the course of the battle, the swamp environment would suddenly turn into a desert. No wonder it is abyss difficulty. I am in a desperate situation from the beginning. Dean was calm. He had experienced countless life and death battles. Such a dangerous and desperate situation could not move him at all. He was not in a daze. He quickly made a move. With a hand speed that ordinary people could not achieve, no matter how much training they had, the kinetic energy instantly exploded. The legs of the mech spurted flames, blowing up the swamp, and the mech rushed out of the swamp. The surrounding demon crocodiles noticed the movement and quickly roared and rushed forward. Whoosh! Some demon crocodiles opened their mouths and ejected mud cannonballs from their mouths. The power was enough to break giant trees. There were also demon crocodiles whose scales stood up and shot out like bullets. Dudian immediately propped up the energy shield of his mecha and pulled the joystick. His mecha swayed like a ghost as he used a laser sword to find a gap in the dense attacks. His feet stepped on the swamp, but he didn't fall. He rushed towards the crocodile as if he was walking on flat ground. The sword turned and quickly cut off the heads of the crocodiles. 5 minutes later, Dean took off the helmet and exhaled. He felt a little sour. The abyss passed. This result is enough to apply for the 2-star Mecha Operator examination. Dudian thought in his heart. Although the abyss difficulty was almost perfect, but it was only relative to ordinary people. His physique was far beyond that of ordinary people. Whether it was reaction speed, hand speed, thinking speed, or the ability to adapt to the battle, it wasn't something that ordinary people could compare with. As long as the mecha could bear it, he could do it to the extreme. It's a bit fast to advance from advanced to abyss. I don't know if it will attract the attention of the higher-ups. But there is no time for me to slowly lurk. Once the blood test report is noticed, and the blood type is different from Su Ming's, I will be exposed. Dudian thought in his heart. He must leave here as soon as possible and find a way to get a new identity. However, it was much more difficult to get a black identity in the Federation than in the Imperial Giant Wall. After all, the technology here was advanced. It was estimated that the streets were full of surveillance cameras. All the identity information of the civilians was recorded in the central computer. It was impossible to fabricate. However, fortunately, these problems only troubled ordinary people. He believed that there must be an invisible dark side to the Federation, such as underground transactions. Moreover, he felt that even if the technology here was more advanced than the old era, the body data of all the residents would not be recorded in the central computer. He only needed to find a person with identity and replace him like Su Ming. He looked at the time. Only half an hour had passed. There were still 7.5 hours of training left. Dudian thought for a moment and put on the helmet again. He chose the abyss difficulty again. This time, he appeared in the forest, surrounded by giant trees, which greatly limited the movement of the mecha. Dudian saw a lot of monsters from the detector. He set the mecha to semi-automatic mode and left the other half to the AI. For example, when the enemy appeared behind the mecha, the machine gun behind the mecha would automatically eject to shoot. He didn't need to operate it. Most of the mecha operators used semi-automatic mode, which was easy and safe. After all, the reaction of the human brain was faster than the AI system. This time, Dudian deliberately injured himself and let the mecha be damaged. He observed the parts and the system of the mecha. When the arm of the mecha was bitten off by a forest wolf, Dudian saw a black liquid sprayed from the mechanical arm. It was like blood, but the color was dark like oil. This was the repair fluid delivered by the energy belt of the mecha. Repeated observation caused the mecha to be quickly damaged and torn apart by the monsters. The challenge was declared a failure. Dudian continued to log in and continued to observe. He had no intention to fight. 8 hours of training quickly ended. When Dean heard the prompt, he took off his helmet and saw that the others in the training room were doing the same movements. But most of them were twisting their necks and sighing. It seemed that they were very tired. Dudian and Zhao Debeo followed the crowd to the cafeteria for dinner. When they returned to the dormitory, someone suddenly came to find him. It was the burly young man who brought him to Commander Lee's place. "Commander Lee is looking for you," the burly young man called out to Dudian. Dudian frowned, and his heart sank. Was he going to kill his way out of here tonight? He got up and silently followed. Zhao de Bao was also puzzled, but he didn't ask much. He got up and comforted Dudian, telling him not to be nervous. Soon, Dean saw Commander Lee again. It was still in his office. However, he wasn't the only one in the office. There were 3 other young men in the office. From their uniforms, they were also mecha operators. "You're all here." Commander Lee saw Dudian come in and nodded. "You're in luck. Haas Company picked the 4 of you from hundreds of 1-star mecha operators in the 3rd District. Pack up and go to Haas Company for an interview tomorrow. Of course, if you don't want to go, you can stay. The great cause of the border defense also needs you." Dudian was at a loss. He exchanged glances with the 3 people next to him and saw that their faces were full of surprise and disbelief. It seemed that they had gotten a great thing. Chapter 1063. I want to quit. After hesitating for a moment, Dean opened his mouth. As soon as the words came out, the 3 people next to him turned their heads in astonishment. Some were puzzled, while others looked at him as if he was a fool. Commander Lee looked at Dean in surprise. He didn't expect that someone would really apply to quit. Although he said so, he didn't expect these people to stay. After all, everyone knew what the border defense was like. It couldn't be compared to Haas Company. If Haas Company sent him an acceptance letter, he was even willing to resign from his position. "You want to quit?" Commander Lee couldn't help but ask again. He was afraid that Dean would be confused and say the wrong words. Dean nodded. "I'm willing to stay and continue to maintain the great cause of the border defense." The corners of the 3 people's mouths twitched slightly. They felt as if a horse had galloped past them. Commander Lee was also speechless. He just said some polite words. Who would have thought that this hothead would listen to it? After a moment of silence, Regimental Commander Lee sighed. "I'm glad to hear that, but Su Ming, you have to think this through. Even though the border needs people like you, Haas Company's invitation is a pretty good opportunity. Aren't you short on money? Haas Company salary is at least 3 times what you're getting now, maybe even higher. In addition, this time Haas Company also said that the 4 of you were selected by them. Please be sure to attend the interview. If you really want to stay in the border defense, then give up during the interview. But I still suggest that you seriously consider it." At this moment, he sincerely hoped that Dean could think clearly and stay in Haas Company. He knew about Dean's family situation. He didn't want him to be confused by a few words and choose the wrong path. Must be present for the interview? Dean was surprised. He suddenly felt that there was something unusual about this interview. He secretly speculated. Among hundreds of mecha operators, why would they choose Su Ming? His conditions are ordinary, and his skills are also ordinary. Is it because I passed the Abyss difficulty during yesterday's training? If that's the case, then the other 3 are also mecha operators who passed the Abyss difficulty? If that's not the reason, then I'm exposed. Dean was horrified. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that the possibility was greater. If his identity had been exposed, then the interview invitation from Haas Company was clearly a Hongmin banquet. The 3 people next to him were just foils to make him look less prominent and lower his guard. If the enemy knows that I'm a demon, then this interview is a bait. Dean's eyes flashed. Think about it carefully. Commander Lee saw that Dean was silent and didn't know what he was thinking. He tried to persuade him and then said to the other 3, "This is just an invitation for an interview. It is not a 100% admission. So, the military will temporarily keep your military status. If you fail the interview, you can come back and continue your work. If you pass, then I wish you good luck." "Thank you, Commander Lee." The 3 of them hurriedly expressed their gratitude. Commander Lee waved his hand and dismissed them. After leaving Regiment Commander Lee's office, the 3 of them were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. They rubbed their palms together and couldn't wait to pack up and say goodbye to this prison-like training base. Suddenly, a cold voice called out to them from behind. They looked back and saw that it was the hothead who refused the invitation from Haas Company. Have all of you passed the Abyss difficulty in mecha training? Dean asked the three of them. The three of them looked at each other. One of them suddenly thought of something and smiled. Yes, I just passed half a month ago. These days, I'm preparing for the 2-star pilot assessment. The other two were startled and said, we're almost the same. So, everyone passed the Abyss difficulty training? One of the young men with a mole on his face suddenly understood and smiled. It seems that this is the reason why Haas Company chose us. Haha, let's go back and pack up. Don't delay tomorrow's interview. A few of them laughed and left. Dean stood in the same place. His heart was still full of doubts. Was it really because of the Abyss difficulty? So, out of hundreds of mecha operators, only the 4 of them passed the Abyss difficulty? Or this fog bomb was disguised by Haas Company to make it more real? If I refuse, I will be exposed. If I don't refuse, I will likely face an ambush. Dean walked forward and bowed his head in thought. I don't know what kind of existence this Haas Company is. If they know my identity, why didn't they let the military arrange a mission to ambush me at the mission site? Wouldn't that appear more natural and simpler? In any case, since I can't escape, I can only go and see. If it is a trap, I don't know if it can trap me. Unless there is a creator's mecha. Dean felt uneasy and returned to the dormitory. Zhao Debao asked him. Dean's heart moved and immediately told him about the interview with Haas Company. Zhao Debao's reaction was the same as the 3 of them, even more exaggerated than the 3 of them. Zhao Debao was completely stunned. The other people in the dormitory were also stunned. After a short silence, cheers broke out. Several people ran to Dean's side, hooked his neck, hammered his chest, and kept talking with jealousy and envy. Su Ming, is there smoke coming out of your ancestor's grave? How could you get an interview invitation from Haas Company? Oh my God. Get lost. Smoke is coming out of your ancestors' graves. I read Su Ming's fortune a long time ago. He has a bright future. Su Ming, you brat, you're in luck this time. Don't forget about us when you become successful. You are actually mixed in a Haas Company. Do you know what Haas Company does? Even if you go to work as a cleaner, your salary will be higher than ours. Nonsense. Haas Company doesn't have a cleaner. They use machines to sweep the floor. Haas Company cultivates mecha masters. This is the seed company of Locke's consortium. Su Ming may be able to see a creator's mecha in the future. He may even have the opportunity to touch 1 or 2. Dean listened to their words and collected some useful information. His heart was surprised. Haas Company turned out to be a mecha manufacturing company. Most of the military's mecha came from Haas Company. This company was also the seed company of Locke's consortium, one of the 4 major consortiums in the Federation. Mecha operators like them were recruited to work as testers in the company. Their status was relatively high. The most important thing was that the treatment and welfare of Haas Company was far better than that of the military. It was the dream of countless mecha operators. The next day, you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.